he has this reference to everything that you write being just one single poem, and then it popped up in Glick. So I thought, hang on. 2 hours later, I'm late for our show. So
No, I think it's going to come up. So yeah, I mean, and like like I said, same thing. Yeah, anything that you want to bring up, please bring up. Yeah. So I feel we're going to go into Oppen. We're going to go into any outside sources that you spent time on. I mean, that's what this is for. This is
yeah,
So yeah,
sure.
please feel free to bring
Yeah,
it in.
sure.
I
Okay,
will.
so sorry, carry on.
So yeah, no pressure or anything like that. Yeah. But how have you been,
Okay.
Damon? It's been a little while. How have you been?
Yeah, been okay. Sort of trying to put this sort of big community-led land project together. We've got American funding for it actually,
Oh,
but
nice.
yeah, because the Americans are a little bit more spirited when it comes to long-term financial arrangements, whereas all long-term financial planning, which is
We
basically
love
why.
throwing money at things. Yeah, we love
Well,
throwing money.
you love getting carried away, really.
Yes, yes. As in, be
Whereas the
careful how many
Brits,
Americans you let into your little British town there. Yeah, you're going to start. It's going to turn into Times Square. You're going to put
yeah,
LED lights on the historic churches and.
yeah. It might be too late for that. Have you been to London recently?
I haven't. I
Um,
haven't been to London since like 2006 is the last time I went to London. I was a kid.
2006.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's where it's all kicking off, really. All the new skyscrapers, but a lot of that money has come from Malaysia,
Oh, right,
not
right.
from America. I mean, Canary Wharf was American money, I think, but a lot of the new skyscrapers, it's all coming from far away, where people are very sort of competitive. So it's like you can only prove yourself unless you really prove yourself if you've built some sort of massive office block or residential block in London. It seems to be what's happening or has happened. It's all crazy. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's all on being numerous, it's come true.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm obviously I'm not as familiar with the UK politics of it all, but the friends that I have
Yeah,
over there, and then yeah, multiple guests and stuff that I talk to over there, have said
yeah.
similar things. Yeah, I've said similar things. Is that you're looking around now, and all of a sudden there's like a big neon sign on this church that was built in
Hello,
750
hello,
AD,
hello.
and, and you're like, oh, when did this happen in the last
I
10
know,
years?
I know.
Yeah.
We just got to do it. I'm going to need to. So, are you ready for it, Andrew? Sex and Judgment.
Yes, yes, we're going to be doing that.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic.
We are.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Let's get into it here.
So, yeah.
So this is welcome to another episode of Heavy Board. We are joined again by poet, writer, friend of the pod. Damon Moore is back with us. You might remember him from the George Oppen episode, where we go into Oppen's complete works. And that sparked a little bit of a discussion here between me and Damon. We were emailing back and forth. We said, that was a great time. Do you want to do Glick? And then Damon said, "Yeah, I think I would." I think, and I said, "Well, what if we did all of Glick? We did all of it.
No, I don't want to do all of it. No.
What if we did the complete work?" I guess minus her last couple books there, but the main book we're using and we're going to reference, and of course there'll be other books brought up. They're all going to be linked below, listeners. Is her Louise Glück poems 1962 to 2012. It's been linked in a few other episodes, including the episode that Damon and I did together. Previously, again, episode 79, go listen to that. But
Yeah.
Damon's back here and we're in the mood. This is going to be multi-parts, listeners, so strap in. We plan to go into 2 books today, but we'll see. My experience with this is sometimes we barely get through one and it's like 3 hours. So then we just have to keep extending it. Damon and I have committed, listeners. We said we've committed. We're
Yeah,
going
we
to do
have. We
this no
have.
matter how many episodes it takes. We're going to get through this for your listening pleasure and for our, creative and artistic pleasure as well. But Damon Moore, welcome
Yeah.
back to Heavy Board.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Lovely to be here. Yeah, just before we started, I was talking about getting completely lost in Open, and I just about managed to catch your email last minute, as if it wasn't all confusing enough. And yeah, the important thing that I've decided to do is to change the sequencing of the poetry titles, so not by date. Now, I don't really want to talk about that because I feel it's something, if I talk about it too much, I'll just get completely confused. And I just hope that it will become clear why I've decided to take that route.
Yeah, why did we decide this? What were we thinking? Were you thinking themes? Were you thinking uh just a
Yeah.
change of pace? What were you thinking, and what were we thinking as we came up with this idea
Yeah.
to do it out
What
of
was
order?
I
And yeah. What
what was
were
I
we?
what was I thinking? I I think it's because, I mean, you do read a poet sequentially by date normally. That's how you would use it. That's how you would read a poet, and you'd be looking for a spread development of ideas over all of that period. Now, with Glick, her themes are constant
Right.
throughout all of her collections. You'll be quite likely, very, very likely, in fact, more likely to read poems about her mother, her childhood, things that she dealt with long, long ago in much later collections. So there's no homogeneity, really. Is that the right word? In her collections, she's not starting with an idea, finishing with an idea, and then going on to another set of ideas and another, and so on and so on. She's constantly creating poems around these big themes and these big subjects, and those go through all the way through her career. And I thought, and the other thing was just like sort of, I suppose I felt a bit goaded into it, really, because she is very untrustworthy when it comes to the titles of her collections, and she admits this herself. And so I thought, well, if you're going to be untrustworthy, then I'm going to mess around with your untrustworthiness, I suppose. I suppose, which isn't very nice thought, but poets aren't always nice.
Yeah. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna get through these books. We'll see how far we get. As I said, we usually get excited and we take a little bit longer than we initially think. We originally planned for 4 parts to this, listeners. We'll see. We'll see if it goes to 8 or something like that. We'll see how far we get.
But why didn't we actually? I mean, why didn't we start with the untrustworthy speaker, which is um, one of her important poems. When she admits something, she doesn't do it very often, and when she does it, it's really quite an important moment. So,
Well, before we get
and
there, as usual, we like to start this off with kind of what is your history with Glick? What is your history with Glick? And now I usually ask the book too, but since we're doing all of
yeah.
her books, just
Well,
your
my
history. When did you
history,
come to her? When did you discover her? What sparked you? I
my
know we talked a little bit about this on
yeah,
the Oppen episode, so listeners go back and listen to that. But still, yeah, what's
yeah.
your history with Glick, Damon? Yeah,
I came to her first through Oppen, I think, and then, well, definitely, and then just her name kept coming up all the
she's a
time.
powerhouse. Yeah,
Yeah, and
powerhouse in
I thought,
American poetry. Yeah,
yeah, and
was
I thought,
R.I.P. Yeah.
yeah, and I thought, Glick, why do I keep on reading it? Why do I keep reading her name? And I kind of kept putting it off, really. Um, when you go to Oppen, he does make references to poems that he's to poets that he's read. It's often quite surprising, the poems, the names that he comes up with in the poems, and he was very conscientious, I think, about that, uh, 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 about reading through what we in this country call the canon, or used to call the canon, and I think it's the same in America. And I thought, I just got to get to grips with it, really. So I started to read her, and that's when you get pulled in. I think, because she's such a complex, mercurial writer that you kind of discover more and more about her as as you read on. And then when we got to talking about Oppen, uh, I suddenly found all of these similarities and comparisons between the two writers, and I thought, well, maybe we could go further into Glick. But it's a step, Andrew. It's a step. She's such a mighty figure, really. It's I
So
don't know what I'm
you're
doing. Don't know what I'm doing sitting here talking about her, really.
well, so you came to Glick a little bit later then, right? Like this is
Yeah.
yeah, for me it was I was introduced during graduate and undergrad study with poetry and stuff like that because she is such a big towering figure in contemporary American
Yeah.
poetry. So, and it wasn't like I was given a book, and it was I think maybe even the first thing I was given to her given by was from a teacher of mine, in undergrad. I had no idea what. And shout out to my teacher, and I've said this before. Some people, regular listeners, know, but yeah, the poet Leslie Harrison, the American poet here, was one of my big mentors. She was my first real kind of literary mentor. I had her in undergraduate. One of the great things she would do as a teacher is she would give us these poems, and she'd give them to us without titles, without who wrote them. And when she would just like give it to us on a handout, piece of paper that she printed out or Xeroxed or something, and she wouldn't
Yeah.
tell us anything. And she would just be like, "What do you see? What do you see in
Yeah.
this?" And we'd read it together. We'd spend the whole class on one poem, maybe.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
wouldn't say anybody was wrong. She wouldn't tell you were straight up wrong. She was
Yeah.
just like, what are you seeing in the lines? What does this make you think of? What does the image evoke? Like kind of this stuff. And, a bunch of undergrads. So some people were throwing out some crazy stuff that made no sense, whatever, random associations. But that's all part of the learning process, when you're trying to figure this
What
out.
kind of age is that in America? What's
For me, I was a little bit older than everybody else in the class. I was around 24, but I think everybody else was around 21, 22. So it was kind of like what they would call here kind of the junior senior year of college,
right?
the kind of last 2 years of the 4-year program or something
Yeah.
around there. It was like an upper level course, when you start getting into serious poet, they call it upper level, of course. And we don't have to get into this,
Yeah.
listeners, but yeah, the 300 and 400 level are considered
Yeah.
higher level courses than the 100 or 200 level. And then when you get to grad school, the 500, 600 level kind of, that's how the colleges group them, at least in the US. But yeah, so
Sure.
she gave us this poem, and I think what it was, I think I wrote it down here because I was one of the ones, it was Firstborn, I think, was the first one that she showed us.
What, the
Uh,
actual poem?
yeah, the actual poem, and I want to get to that eventually here too as we get into the first book, but it just like because it's just so good. But like I had no idea, and I was like a 24-year-old who's I like poetry, I like writing poems, I like songs and music, whatever. And then
Yeah.
coming to Glick for the first time, like there is just a power. And I was noticing this when like I was reading that first book in here because I was like, okay, this is the first book. And you emailed me about this a little. How old was she when this first book came out?
Which one? Firstborn.
Yeah, Firstborn, her first like a
Yeah,
full collection
she was 25, and it was published on January the 1st, I think.
on the in 68.
1968. Yeah.
And so a lot of those were, and we're going to get into this too, not too much, hopefully, but like just a lot of those poems were composed leading up to that, right? So the poems say from 1962 to 2012, because she was publishing before that first collection came out. But it's just like, yeah, I don't know. There is something about Glick. There's like, I wanted to ask you about that. There's like a rawness, especially in that first book. There's just it's not as refined, and we'll get into this as we get into the first book with specific
Mm,
poems and stuff,
mm,
especially
mm.
because for me personally, coming to this, like I had read some of her best work before coming to this podcast sitting here, right? I had read The Wild Iris. That was the first one, getting the
Yeah.
poem from my teacher, Leslie Harrison, and then reading the full collection and stuff like that about her, her big Pulitzer winner. That was when she was a very mature artist well into her career, and was a powerhouse already, an American household name in poetry. But then going backward this way, where I'm going into the very first book in 68, I was a little bit shocked at how kind of sloppy some of the stuff was. But then I'm thinking, she was 25. But there's something about it. There's like this hypnotizing power in the way that she writes her stuff, that
Yeah.
even when it's a little sloppy, even when it's a little, young person unrefined, like she became known for in her later years, were very refined, very precise in her kind of mid-career.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just there's just this raw thing that's just drawing you into this fierceness from this little tiny woman that's, like 25 years old. Uh
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I just
Well,
couldn't
she had
believe it.
this. She had this very abrupt. She had this very abrupt style, didn't she?
And I would
Um,
ask you about that style. Like, do you see any
yeah.
Oppen, especially in that very first collection?
Well, yeah. As I dialed in late for this episode, it's because I was reading up and I just caught by more and more of the references, really, and it's that kind of abrupt um, lexic language that's called parataxis, uh, which is kind of a series of rapid sentences or declarations. And of course, Oppen used it in a completely different way than Glick. So Oppen was using that in order to bind together sort of um, uh, almost numeric small little pieces of imagery. Um, whereas Glick is doing it for something. She's doing it, I think, because she's argumentative. I mean, the whole of this Firstborn, the whole of this first book of hers. I mean, she sounds like in a complete tantrum, all the way through the book, and many of the poems sort of come across in that way.
Yeah,
It's really quite shocking, quite 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 violent language. And there's one poem called "Hesitate to Call," which she's she's almost saying, "Don't read this. I'm not ready." Should we
yeah.
just have a look at that?
There's an
What's
aggression, like almost an
absolutely
aggression that's,
aggression is the right word.
and you can
Yeah,
feel that. Like I was just so crazy, like I was just so shocked again coming to it from, because it's almost apt that we decided to kind of do this out of order in a little bit of a way, but I like that we're still starting with the first book because it was
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, coming to that peak of her career, that Pulitzer Prize winning level of her career, Wild Iris in the 90s there, and then going all the way back to the 60s. And listeners that listen to this regularly, this kind of, Damon, I was just thinking this, like it kind of lines up perfectly with that Oppen revival that happened in the 60s, right? His first book all those years ago. And then all of a
yeah,
sudden he's back in the scene. And then the Glick comes
yeah,
out of nowhere, exploding with this aggressive, this young, beautiful woman coming in there with this aggressive, violent prose that just like you kind of like sucks
yeah,
everything out of you when you start doing it.
yeah.
From the very first page.
I
I
don't know if it's a. I mean, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, Andrew. I mean, we could have another have a many conversations about it because we're
please,
still
yeah,
not
yeah.
we're still not really know. I mean, she's definitely influenced heavily by Oppen, but we don't actually have the evidence, have we? I mean, we've got all the
Right.
circumstantial evidence, but we don't really have we've got 3 pages in her book, Proofs and Theories, and that's all. And she talks about Oppen's white space and that. She doesn't say, I came alive, Oppen revival happened in the 1960s. I was right there.
Right.
Suddenly I thought, my God, this is incredible. And Oppen is quite incredible. I mean, I think he could have been a wonderful lyric poet, Oppen, if he'd have been slightly less sort of stuck in his ways
Yeah.
and determined to see objectivism through to its last, follow it all the way through. But he's got some lovely lyrical passages, and if he could have strung those together in a way that Oppen was able to do, and he's so much more tender than Oppen. Oppen is so much more tender than Glick. Glick isn't tender. Should we just read that? Hesitate to Call, because I've got it
For
open.
I do want to get there. One last thing.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Damon. I like to do this like kind of very detailed.
yeah, yeah.
The
Okay.
dedication, and this is
Yeah,
speaking of questions we're not going to get an answer to.
I
The
know.
dedication to my teacher. What do we think? Do we think it might be a little bit of an Oppen glance? Do we think it might be more literal? Her actual teachers, like, kind of. What do we think? To my teacher, because it's vague. There's not even a name. There's not even a name. Like there's the.
Well, I've
I
got a
don't
whole
know. I don't
theory
know.
about that.
Yes, please. Let's hear the
I've got
theory,
a,
then, please.
I've got a whole theory about that,
Please.
and yeah, that that's yeah, you're right. You know, yeah, I have to my teacher. Golly, I think the teacher's somebody else. I
Yeah.
don't think so. It's not Oppen, but it might. She's so tricky. It could be more than one teacher. It could be more than one teacher. But
Yeah,
then why didn't she say to my teachers? She could have said to my teachers, couldn't she?
yeah, but it's a specific teacher. And I think that is true. When you're doing this, you're getting the mentorship from professionals in the field. It's always usually one is more important than, even if you have a couple, there's always one you can point to that say, oh yeah, that was the one that really
Yeah,
influenced me, or made me think of this in a different way, opened my eyes to something, whatever it is. Like I already mentioned mine, and I've had others, through grad school and stuff like that. Again, contemporary poets, mostly on the American side here, of course, because that's where I reside. But it's yeah, I don't know. I just struck by that. I was like, huh, to my teacher, because a lot of her other books are dedicated, like most people, they dedicate them to a friend or their spouse or their children, or
yeah. And
whatever it
hers
is.
are as well, aren't they?
Yeah,
Um,
usually for every other book, but this one is a little mysterious. She just wanted to put that little bit of
it
mystery.
is. I mean, she. I suppose we'd better give a little bit of some context actually, because not
Please, yeah.
everybody knows who Louise Glück is. So, who is Louise Glück? Well, she's Louise Elizabeth Glück. She's an American poet, born New York City, 1943. That's about 35 years after George Oppen. She grew up in Long Island, which is significant, I think, in terms of her second collection, The House on Marshland. Um, and she moved to Woodmere in Long Island. Have you ever been there? Woodmere?
I've never been there, but I know in that
Yeah,
second collection too, she's referencing most of the East Coast. I know there's a
yeah.
lot of references to North Carolina. I'm more familiar with that area, with the Hatteras, kind of Cape Hatteras area, on what they call the
Yeah,
Outer Banks of the North Carolina
but
area.
particularly salt marshes,
Yeah,
um, and that. Although she doesn't talk about, she calls it a small grey house, I think. So if you're ever in Woodmere, look for a small grey house.
yeah.
That might be her. That might be a childhood home. So her paternal grandparents were Hungarians. She emigrated to the US in 1900. She never studied as a full-time college student due to a prolonged recovery from anorexia, but she took writing classes at Columbia University with Leonie Adams and Stanley Kunitz. So you've got two potential teachers there, but she's, as you say, it's just one. Um, she then taught at several colleges and universities, including Williams College in Massachusetts and Goddard College in Vermont, where a lot of her poetry is set, I feel. She married twice with a son by her first husband. Both marriages ended in divorce. And she was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2020, 3 years before her death. And she gave a speech about The Little Black Boy by William Blake. And she was trying to reference the intimacy of poetry between poet and reader, so that she was interested in a sort of how you can connect via your poetry, first person, with a reader.
and that was happening at the
Um,
time. Yeah, with the kind of confessional movement. This is after Robert Lowell's life studies, which again, I know
yeah,
it's Snodgrass, Heart's Needle. The confessional stuff had started, but really what pushed it into the mainstream was Robert Lowell, this huge figure embracing the confessional style with life studies. And I believe
yes.
63, 64, although don't quote me on that date.
Okay, I won't.
Something like that. Yeah. Around that time with the Robert Lowell's life studies, and everybody that, and I think there's direct references to Lowell in this, particularly in the second book. There's direct references to Nantucket, but like you said, she was living in Massachusetts, and Nantucket's a big thing there. But I
Yeah,
immediately connected it to the Robert Lowell poem. What is it? Quaker Graveyard in Nantucket or something like that.
yeah,
Or
that's right.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
immediately connected it to that, and I think
yeah,
there's obvious connection, but not necessarily. But Glick is, that's not her style to be that
yeah,
reliant on another poem. So it
yeah,
isn't, it's not reliant on it or anything, but I
yeah.
think it is kind of not in conversation even, but I just think inspired maybe when you, or maybe just the fact that she was in Massachusetts and you can't avoid looking at those beautiful kind of beach like Nantucket
I couldn't,
islands. Like
I couldn't work that Lowell poem out. It sounded to me like the wreck of the Deutschland and Gerard Manley
Lowell is
Hopkins, and
very,
yeah,
very difficult. Yeah. Lowell is
and I
very,
thought,
especially his
well,
early stuff.
and
Yeah.
I thought, okay, so what's the difference between this and Wreck in the Deutschland? And I never, it's one of the first, but I think, was that the first poetry collection? I think it was. I think it was. It was
And
selected
Lowell is
poems.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Well,
he's
selected
he's
poems. And I
so
thought,
big. He's so big that
yeah,
it's like, oh, this huge figure in American poetry, come read it. But if you are just kind of just getting into it, it's a slog, especially if you go to that early stuff. If you go to his later stuff at kind of the mid-career when he starts doing into kind of the life studies confessional thing, it's a little bit easier to understand. Like,
I
Skunk
don't.
Hour and all those big
Yeah,
poems like that.
I don't. I wrote a poem called Harvard, which sort of contrasted the two teachers at their teaching styles, with Robert Lowell going crazy at the blackboard and getting out all this poetry, and then Elizabeth Bishop just across the way, a few classrooms away,
Oh yes.
just smoking silently and waiting for somebody to say something. I know which class I would like to have been there. But I mean,
Which,
what does make a big and mighty poet? I mean, it's a strange idea, isn't it? Is it who's saying this is a big and mighty poet? I mean, obviously you've got to write, say, more than six poetry collections, but then Elizabeth didn't. Elizabeth Bishop didn't. She only wrote what, three, I think. So, and she's a very big and very mighty poet.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, for Bishop is a strange case because Bishop was just so good. Like, she was just so, like, everything she did was
She's so
perfect.
so cool. Yeah,
It was
yeah,
perfect. Like,
yeah,
everything was perfect. So
yeah.
she was kind of a perfectionist, blah blah. Lowell too, though. I think even in those early, like, his rhyme schemes are so complex, especially in those first couple books. They're so complex, and like he even like,
Yeah.
how do you come up with that? Well, you spend years coming up with that. You write the poem, and then you spend years coming up with this rhyme scheme to make sure the end rhymes are perfect and all of that. So I
I
mean,
don't
it
know. I
takes a
mean,
while,
yeah.
but
Does
yeah.
does that still apply? Because I mean,
In
all rhymes.
contemporary poetry, I'd say no, it doesn't apply at all. But I mean, for the, you can tell, I think, when somebody spent effort and time on it, especially if you're doing something formal like Lowell was doing, it's usually pretty obvious whether they spent a lot of time coming up with this or not. At
But what
least,
you're
yeah,
all you're really doing with metrics, okay, is to supply a music to the ancient instruments that we no longer know what they sounded like. So the whole thing is really just an invented music. That's
yeah,
what it is. All these, you know, in the early formation of poetry, poetry was always sung to music. We've lost those lyres. We've lost that. We haven't got any TikTok of Orpheus, playing his lyre, reciting his poetry. We don't know what those instruments sounded like. Now, there is a certain amount of reconstruction has been going on, but not very long. But this whole thing about there's this rule book about metrics, it's all just made up. We don't actually know the real rhythms of ancient music as set to those ancient instruments. So, I mean, I suppose Orpheus would have been a big, powerful and mighty poet, wouldn't he? But we don't know what he sounded like. So I mean, would we have gone up to him at the end of the performance and said, "That was just fantastic. Your sense of metrics and rhythm just carried me away. I was just transported, and nobody's writing like you. Nobody's, you know." So to me, the whole metric thing, it became it did become rather fundamental. Like, you know, critics of Picasso always used to say you had to be able to paint beautifully before you can start, in the classic idiom, before you start an art movement like Cubism. So it's a bit of a it's something that hangs around a poet's neck, but I'm not sure. To me, there is a music there in a good poem, and the often the music is not there in a big and mighty contemporary poet, and that I would expect there to be music, and often there isn't music, and it is very hard to capture. But
I think you're
but
right.
yeah, Lowell
It,
was really doing that.
it gets at, yeah, what they call received form. So I would say even meter is a version of received form. It's this thing that you can participate in that's been passed down, yeah, for centuries now.
Yeah,
You can hop into it if you want, and most don't, because it makes you sound a little archaic. It makes you sound a little old fashioned if you're writing in perfect iambic pentameter and stuff. But there's also, yeah, I think there, like you said, there that is something that's hard to talk about with poetry: the music, the rhythm. I say music, rhythm, whatever you received form. So if you're using iambic pentameter or a different meter like that, and this can get very complex if you're really into this stuff. I am not as into it, but I have friends that are and stuff. So using that is kind of a received kind of um, framework, so you can work within that framework. But I think there is like, you establish your own rhythm if you're not using those, and that is
Yeah.
something that's hard to talk about in poetry, but it matters so much. Like when you say you kind of try to listen for the music, and I know that's a metaphor, listeners, right? Like it's a metaphor, but also it isn't, right? Like you're listening to the music, but it's this established pattern. The poem is its own authority in a way. And I know that can be conflicting for kind of math brained people, like there are no absolutes in this type of stuff. So, but
I
yeah, I
think there's
think
a
you're
kind
right.
of I think there is a kind of brain patterning that goes on. So I mean,
Yes.
I don't think at the time of Shakespeare, Shakespeare would have thought, he wouldn't have he would have had that brain patterning. He would have heard that kind of verses being spoken, I think, by players on stages in classrooms. And his brain would have been, from the Elizabethans, and his brain would have been very receptive to that kind of Elizabethan musicality. But we don't have that now, do we? I mean, we just don't. And
Yeah.
I mean, the nearest we got to it, I suppose, would be rap, I suppose, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And
And
I've
there
read
are some, yeah,
some interesting stuff on that too, because it is a lot of times the rhythm's more important, the
yeah,
melody's more important of the words, not just the music we're talking here, listeners.
yeah, yeah.
The
That's
words
right.
that are being spoken are more
That's right.
important than than the perfect rhyme. And the one thing I like, especially in contemporary kind of rap and hip hop, slant rhymes, very big in contemporary rap and hip hop, more so than you'll see in contemporary poetry, really, in terms of
Yeah, yeah,
changing the
definitely.
pronunciation of a word to kind of slur it and rhyme it with another word. you
I
know
like your word melodic. I think that's a
yeah,
nicer word
yeah.
than metrics. I mean, metrics is not a very nice word, is it?
It's more sciencey. I was just
You're
listening
being,
to
yeah,
a podcast where they and it's this guy, like his name's Alex O'Connor. He's actually a Brit. He's a Brit. He's over there in London. And he runs this. It used to be called Cosmic Skeptic, but now he just runs this podcast called Within Reason. It's a lot of theology. It's a lot of kind of rationality, philosophy. Anyway, he just had somebody on, and one of the first questions he asked him was Shakespeare a mathematician? Because of what you're saying, the metric kind of stuff. If you're talking about that, if you want to do a sciencey
yeah,
kind of math brain, you could go that way
yeah,
with it
yeah,
because it
yeah.
is mathematically sound in a way. uh but then there comes the problem, is that's not how most people think. We don't think in this way. We don't speak that way, like, and it does kind of.
But it's also not authentic. That's the
Yeah,
point. As I
it's
was saying,
received.
it is
Yeah,
not.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
there.
it's not authentic, and so you can't really say you've got to do it this way. If you want to turn a gas from a gas to a liquid, you get out the Bunsen burner. This is what you do. It's just all made up, mostly by the Victorians. So I just think one can be, a young mind can easily be led astray, can easily be sort of intimidated by it. And oh, you've got to be able to write metrics before you can write any poetry. Well, it's just not true. You've got to get through to the essential thing that you're trying to express and to trying to communicate. That's the thing that you have to do. And of course, dyslexics is a complete nightmare.
Right. Yeah, yeah. But I think you're right. I think it's to point this out is important. I think this what makes people struggle with a lot of it too, is because when you're talking about poetry, you are talking about these kind of things that aren't really rules.
No, no,
Like
they're
they're
not.
not
They're
really
not.
like, oh, you have to do it this way.
Yeah,
uh
yeah,
and I mean, I struggle with this too. I mean, this whole podcast is about it, but like then there are kind of objective standards too, in terms of like just like how you structure a sentence, like, in terms, like,
yeah,
is it actually
yeah,
like a properly structured sentence? It
yeah,
does then, and
yeah.
there's exceptions. There's always exceptions. You don't have to
Where's that full
necessarily do
stop?
that.
Where's that full
Yeah,
stop? I know a
exactly.
grammar and all
Yeah,
that kind of thing. I mean,
yeah.
Grammarly, what's, oh God, no,
Well,
that's no
and
use to
Grammarly's
poets.
retarded like
No
that.
use to poets
That's
whatsoever.
yeah. Grammarly, I've had Grammar, and I mean, I have it on like web extensions and stuff, and like sometimes it'll tell me to change something, especially if I wrote something in Word or whatever, and I'm pasting it into Substack or something like that to publish it. It's like they'll start highlighting things where I'm just like, oh yeah, you guys, you're a robot, so you don't understand that like this is a flourish, like this is a creative liberty that isn't technically grammatically wrong, but it is if you're a robot that has this list that you're following, like a Grammarly does. And I think it does turn a lot of people off. I think you're right, like to talk about it turns a lot of people off because they want an answer. They want that, this answer is correct, this answer is wrong, like you would in biology or math. So there's some, sorry, I almost said it the British way, maths.
Yeah.
But it just, I don't know. It turns a lot of people off. So I think I'm glad that you brought that up because it is important, but and it is harder to
Yeah.
see. It's harder you can feel that established rhythm when you're reading something, especially like Glick, who writes mostly in a non-metered way. Although, even though she's experimenting, there's some where the rhyme
Well,
schemes are,
that's where your word melodic fits,
yeah,
because I would say that most of her poetry, apart from possibly Firstborn, is melodic. And the criticism around her, they say that she plays a lot with rhyme forms, but it's impossible to write a poem without playing with rhyme forms, isn't it? So we've established that we don't quite know what a mighty and powerful poet is, right? We haven't established to my teacher who that is. And we got Oppen hovering in the background. Do you know, he said, I was reading just now, he said, this is a passage from one of his unpublished poems. There is that one word which one must define for oneself, us. And that, I think, goes back to Glick's Nobel speech, where she was trying to create this connection with the reader. But you can't really do that unless you agree that there is an us. And how do we know that there is an us? How do we explain there is an us to ourselves? And that's what Oppen is saying. There is that one word which must define for oneself us. Well, how are we going to define us without poetry? So how are we going to do that? It goes on in our minds all the time.
right.
How am I connecting with other people? How are other people connecting with other people? But so few answers to that, aren't there?
When I think you're pointing out something too is a kind of the shift in contemporary poetry in the 20th century, where you have the modernists, and the modernists did this a little bit, especially when you get into certain ones like Eliot and stuff. Some of his stuff you could argue is borderline confessional, or maybe even if we broaden it, argue that it's borderline trying to encompass this universal us or something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
It's starting to do that. And then really after that, like kind of after the modernists, we really got, the beats, and then of course the confessional kind of this, at least in America. I'm sorry, my frame of reference is always kind of American stuff here. Yeah, for the international listeners.
No,
but
that's fine.
yeah.
I much prefer American poetry to contemporary English
It is
poetry.
interesting when you switch centuries there. Like when you go to a further back, the British stuff is better, but then when you go for more recent centuries, the American stuff is better. It's funny how that works out. But yeah, it is. But yeah, I think it is like there's a shift in just contemporary poetry toward that kind of what I think Oppen would call us, or what you just brought up as the us, kind of how we define this, how we bring readers in, all of that. Yeah,
I think Eliot did that by the obliteration of the self.
Yeah,
and
which is
I
one
don't
way.
know
Yeah.
But I think what Oppen is because he's a more tender poet. The word tender keeps coming up with Oppen. There is that word which one must define for oneself. So we have an obligation to do that. Us, I really think people who are tender-hearted, or think about other people, have empathy. They must tackle that question. Oppen's quite right. Whereas Eliot, I think his vision is on a very grand scale, isn't it? It's on a very grand landscape.
And it's interesting. I like the way you put that in terms of the way Eliot kind of removed the self, and then the confessional kind of put the self. And both of those methods were an attempt to do what Oppen calls this kind of us, or something like this kind of how you define this, right? Or how you broaden it, open it up, make the reader come into the work of art in his kind of, I hesitate to use the word magic, but I think it is kind of like a magical, almost a spell cast over. And I'm using that word because I think it's a good frame of reference in terms of just, something in the air, something intangible, like kind of around us, kind of spreading through us. And I'm like, we already said from the very first page, I was just this energy radiating off the page of this 25-year-old girl's book, first book, like just the energy radiating off. And now it's 60 years later, 70 years later, and it's
why don't we take you back, Andrew? Why don't we take you back to age 24?
Let's go.
When you first, and why don't you give us your reading of Firstborn?
Let's see here what I have it marked here. Firstborn's on page 36. There. 36. Okay. And this is, I want to get to you about this too in this first book. Is I it started in the second section, but we'll get to this after we talk about this poem here. But about how there's kind of a shift in this book, even too. And this is where I started getting curious about the years that these poems were composed in, and we don't have to get, I feel we can get bogged down with that if we're looking up dates for individual stuff, but it's still, I feel like it's worth mentioning. Yeah, there was a shift in this first book. Even I could see, you can kind of feel it as you read through. I did it on the first read, and on the second read, it was almost even more prominent. And I think Firstborn is part of that kind of shift, almost like you could sense a maturity happening halfway through the book, which is rare. I've very rarely seen that, especially in a first book like this. But maybe because she spent so many years composing the book, that was I don't know. We'll get into that. Let's read the poem first. I know. Yeah, I'm already getting bogged down with this stuff, but that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for, listeners. All right. So I'll read this, and this is an incredible poem, listeners. Firstborn, title poem of her first book, 1968. Firstborn. The weeks go by. I shelve them. They are all the same, like peeled soup cans. Being sour in their pot, I watch the lone onion, floating like Ophelia, caked with grease. You, listless, fidget with the spoon. What now? You miss my care? Your yard ripens to a ward of roses, like a year ago when staff nuns wheeled me down the aisle. You couldn't look, I saw. Converted love, your son, drooling under glass, starving. We are eating well. Today, my meat man turns his trained knife on veal, your favorite. I pay with my life.
Right. Does that make you feel 24 again?
It's interesting because I always do when I go back to stuff that really hit me at that point, especially when I talk about this with some of my big figures in my teens almost, because even in my 20s, maybe I'm not far enough removed from it in my mid 30s here, but it's reading Bukowski or something like that for the first time, and then kind of going back to it now that I'm in my 30s and reading what inspired me when I was 19, I took something different from it. Like where I took maybe, like we said, almost like kind of the violent, gritty kind of stuff more so, the depressed angle out of this more than I did, say, the birth angle, the kind of giving life angle, the kind of commitment to your children, kind of, I don't know, missing these kind of more adult, more mature things that you kind of only can get once you've experienced those things, I guess. So yeah, it brings you back a little bit, but like I said, in that class, I was kind of, I don't know. I don't even remember what I said exactly, but I remember I said something kind of crazy where I was like, well, this image could be some, crazy contemporary thing that didn't exist in 1968, like, and the kind of, my teacher was just like, it could be, like she'd never say like, oh no, that's completely wrong. She would just,
why do you think she's titled it Firstborn?
Interesting. Well, I get a little bit of domesticity out of this. I get a little bit of marriage. I mean, obviously the firstborn here. There's references to, I think, the kind of Christ angle, like the way it just works, right? Like I wrote my notes. So when I first read this and I started writing notes on this, my notes were, my God, what a poem. Glick just had this talent, this kind of, and it was working on so many levels. Yes, you have the Christ angle, right? So firstborn, right? God's first and only son, etc., etc., the sacrifice that comes with it. We have the kind of ripening roses. We have references to straight up Ophelia, and of course she's referencing Ophelia from the Shakespeare. Like this is just working on so many different levels. Like it is unbelievable that a 25-year-old was able to compose. Well, maybe I'm just using today's standard. Maybe 25-year-olds were doing this all the time back then. But
I like the image. I watched The Lone Onion floating like Ophelia. I don't know how Ophelia would have felt about that, but it's you can just see it sort of floating on top of the stew, can't you? Like a sort of murky pond.
And Ophelia's this figure, right? Ophelia's this, at least in contemporary. I don't know if she still was in the 1968 version. Listeners that know or have an idea about this, obviously put it in the comments. We love hearing from you. But it's just this, so we know Ophelia from Hamlet, right? Okay, so what does Ophelia do, right? Ophelia is this kind of tragic figure, right? That ends up, she drowns herself, doesn't she?
Yeah, she drowns herself because Hamlet breaks their engagement.
So
And
she's and so there is that kind of, and again, this is the 60s. This is the kind of the feminist, glory, like this kind of it's all blossoming. And it's
yeah,
interesting that Glick was in the middle of this, because there is a feminist angle to this, but I think, and we can get into this too. I think we will, as this long project continues here, Damon, and we keep going and going. I think that because Glick was a feminist, clearly, but I think it's a mistake to
she
put
wasn't
that framework,
gendered.
right, to put
She
that
wasn't
framework
gendered.
on her,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's there, obviously, because she's a woman
yeah.
living in the world and she experienced all this stuff, of course, so it's there. But she was concerned about even bigger, more universal thing. It's not, it's a little, it's almost cheapening her work to say it was, oh, it's just feminist work or something. Like, it's so much more than that, even though it is there.
She also denied that she was a professional poet.
Yeah, interesting.
Mm.
I
And I
wonder how
wonder
much of that is performative. Yeah, when you're when you have a
well,
Pulitzer in your back pocket.
I wonder because I think Anne Sexton would have been a bit older than her, and I think that there isn't really. I think that's a connection that goes back to Oppen. I think she's saying, um, I'm kind of much more interested in Oppen than I am in, confessional poetry. Yeah, I I, I
Yes.
I think that's the answer.
And the ways that she did it too, because she's doing some confessional. You're hearing about her sons. You're hearing about her son. You're hearing about some of her failed marriages. You're hearing about, some of her feminist stuff. But it isn't confessional. It's kind of right up to the edge. It's kind of almost. And this is what I think is so brilliant. I mean, we've touched on one poem so far, but it's
I know,
right up to
yeah.
the edge. It's
I mean,
right up to the edge. It's
there's a lot of
brilliant.
kitchen there's a lot of kitchen stuff, I think, in Firstborn,
Yes.
isn't there? And
Yes.
you can sense maybe a little bit of a frustration there,
Yes.
you know.
And it makes
Don't
sense
really
for the
want to be in the
time,
kitchen.
the
I
movement of
associate with
feminism. Yeah.
I associate kitchens with my mother,
Yes. The 1950s, 40s housewives, kind of. Yes. Especially in America post-war.
Let's read Thanksgiving on page 8.
Yes.
So it's almost like a companion poem. Okay. In every room, encircled by a nameless southern boy from Yale, there was my younger sister, singing a Fellini theme and making phone calls, while the rest of us kept moving her discarded boots, all sat and drank. Outside in 29 degrees, a stray cat grazed in our driveway, seeking waste. It scratched the pail. There were no other sounds, yet on and on the preparation of that vast, consoling meal, edged towards the stove. My mother had skewers in her hands. I watched her tucking skin as though she missed her young, while bits of onion misted snow over the prolonged death. What do you think about that?
Thanksgiving, interesting with this one. It didn't speak to me too much when I was reading through. She does this thing, and I think she might have gotten this from Oppen, but we'll see, where she cuts words in half at the end of the line here. It was one thing that one of my pet peeves that was driving me crazy in this, but I get she was experimenting. It was the 60s, etc. And you notice that she goes away from this in her later books, which we'll get to. She kind of like grows out of that little kind of, I hate to call it childish, but it kind of is the kind of, the name hyphen less on the next line, that she does that in a couple other poems too. Yeah, the 20-9 on the other line,
You've got that bit of onion again, haven't you? I mean, why should that bit of onion be popping up again? Bits of onion. What's all that about?
Interesting, yeah. The
And
cooking,
then
the
it's sort of
Thanksgiving.
it's set in the kitchen. And why is it called Thanksgiving? You have to, every time she titles something, she's not to be trusted titling things. So for me, and I think I'm just going to come right out and say this.
Oh yeah, here we go.
I think Firstborn is titled to acknowledge her older deceased sister.
Right.
I think that's what Firstborn means. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't reference other things. I mean, I like your interpretation of Christ's only son, Firstborn. I don't know, but
There's
I mean,
just a little bit of that. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's all, but it's there.
but also
Yeah,
you could say this is
hovering
my
in the background. Yeah.
Also, you could say this is my firstborn.
Right.
This is the first book of poems I'm going to write, or it could have been about her own child.
Specifically baby boys. There's a lot of reference to baby boys
Yeah,
specifically, and and again, it's good. That's what she knew, right? That's what she knew. Yeah. So
but
it
but
is
but her son was born, I think, 3 years later. But there is reference to abortions in this in
right.
Firstborn, so it could be the the first. Well, not so much abortions actually, but stillbirths, yeah, or
Right.
miscarriages. Um, so it could be a reference to that. But I think it's very clearly written in this poem that Thanksgiving, and this is it's a pretty repellent image, and I had to read it 2 or 3 times before I decided that it was what I thought it was, which is that the I can't even say it actually, so horrible. But anyway, her younger sister,
Say it.
her
That's what it's
youngest,
for, Damon. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You only
her
hear it on
deceased,
heavy board, listeners, right here. You hear Damon. Yeah.
her her deceased sister who died after 7 days after being born. That's her. She's the turkey that her mother is dressing. My mother had the skewers in her hands. I watched her tucking skin as though she missed her young, while bits of onion misted snow over the prolonged death. Now, we've already seen that bits of onion appear when people float in in the water. We know that for her, the soul, or as she calls it, the little soul, lives in a state of coldness, which is where we get the misted snow. And I think it's one of the first indications in Firstborn that this is actually what's happening here. So I think Firstborn means her older deceased sister who died when she was 7, who died before Louise Glück. So she
Right.
was the firstborn, right?
Right.
Glück was the secondborn. And then she had another sister called Therese. And it's also coincidental that those three sisters are the sisters of fate as well, which we'll get onto at a later stage. And
It's
and the
all in
fact
there.
that
Yeah.
and the fact that Oppen considered amor fati, the love of fate, to be at the center of on being numerous. So we got like references sort of coming at us from all sorts of directions.
And the kind of
So
the no, please
yeah.
go on. Please go on.
So if we skip to page 42, phenomenal survivals of death, um, that's suddenly her sister pops up. Because she'd have to pop up, wouldn't she? I mean, she'd have to be there. If she's going to call the book of poetry after her older sister, her older deceased sister, she's got to pop up in this book. Okay, and here she is. Phenomenal survivals of death in Nantucket. Here in Nantucket, does this tiny soul confront the water? So that's Ophelia floating around like a bit of onion as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes on to do all of those Nantucket references. I mean, what is it about Nantucket? I mean, it was a whaling station, wasn't it? I think it's something all the Americans know about, but the Brits are sort of a bit puzzled.
Yeah, it's a coastal set of kind of, I don't even think they're barrier islands. I think they're actual islands along, or not even the coastal region of that part of Massachusetts. It was a huge whaling um, industry in Melville's time, where you get Moby Dick kind of talking about it. It's where a lot of the whale
Right,
ships sailed out to the
right.
deep, cold parts of the Atlantic to get that whale oil till they made that
Yeah,
illegal. And then now it's just kind of a vacation spot. Like it's kind of like a touristy, Cape Cod, these kind of just beach. Think of it as kind of the south of France, right? Kind of like the kind of beach areas that everybody in the country goes to for summer vacations and things, and rents little cottages, and it's very picturesque and quaint and gorgeous, and there's a lot of historic buildings from that whaling time. There's a lot of ports and stuff. It's just very beautiful, especially in the summertime when the weather's nice, up there. So yeah,
yeah,
Nantucket's big, but even more than that, Nantucket, because of the settlers, and this is where we get into the Lowell stuff, why Lowell was obsessed with Nantucket and Massachusetts and stuff, because he was what they call the Boston Brahmin, meaning he was descended from this high class, that helped settle America. His family were Navy admirals. That was what they all did. The Lowell name, there's Lowell, Massachusetts, named for his family. There's academies named after their families at like Harvard, and there's this kind of just a upper class. It's associated with this kind of, especially at this time, would be associated with upper class kind of, they call in America WASPs, right? White Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Protestants, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
from like the first type of settlers that came over from, yeah. So it is important. It does loom large in kind of American history, more so than British history. But
Yeah.
in Glick's time, I think it would have just been like a beautiful kind of resort beach vacation thing, just like it is now.
Yeah.
With some people still making a living fishing, but not many. It's still mostly just touristy beach. Let's get an ice cream cone and
It's
sit on the
yeah,
sand. Yeah.
it's weird. I recently read a thriller actually, which was all about self-driving cars, which there was this rivalry between the two managing directors of this self-drive company. One of them ousted the other one. And in revenge, they changed all the software to all the cars had to kill humans, and the whole book was about how many human beings could a fleet of cars kill in Nantucket. So obviously, this sort of theme of whaling and mass slaughter is sort of taken
Yeah.
hold with this, in this island. It was quite a powerful idea, really, and
And
it was
there's a lot
amazing
of
how
legends, there's a lot of death, there's
yeah,
a lot of ghost stories, there's a lot
yeah,
of revolutionary kind of stories at that
ghost
time.
ghost
Yes.
stories. There you go, Little
Yes.
Soul, ghost
Yes.
stories.
Yes. Little souls
Yes,
everywhere. And I mean, it's all the
here,
historic. I mean,
yeah,
obviously in England, it's even more. Tower of London. These kind of a lot anywhere where there's lots of death historically over many years. There's always great stories that come out of it. Great ghost stories, great legends, great myths. Some of them might be true.
You
Like
see,
yeah,
I think that what Firstborn represents is um, proto themes for Glick, and I think that she doesn't really know where a lot of these themes are leading, but it's amazing how they just little bits of them are there. I mean, have you noticed her? Have you noticed her water phobia?
I yeah. I mean, water's definitely a huge part of it, and that is obviously there's a lot of historical reference to that too. Water is something that appears in literature and poetry, and then you could get into the symbolism of it, throughout history, because we were, most civilizations were around the coastlines until we had technology that allowed us to live prosperously away from the coastlines,
Yeah,
railroads and things like that. Yeah, so it just, yeah, I don't know. I mean, so yeah, definitely that's there. And you think about the mythological kind of implications of that, and Glick was somebody who knew her mythology. That's for sure.
well, so over half the poems in Firstborn reference water phobia, really, one way or another. Um, and the only exception is the ocean, and the ocean, I think, is excluded because the ocean was so important to Oppen, and she's not quite sure about where she's going with the ocean, but she keeps the ocean away from it. But the rest of it is is very let's just have a couple of examples. So in the egg, page 7.
Yes, I want to talk about the egg too. Yeah, please, let's get
Yeah.
into it.
So the egg is that the first extent? Is that the first section by section
Yeah,
of
that was,
Firstborn? It
it's
is, isn't it?
technically the second poem in the collection, but the first one with parts to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, of course, sectionalizing poetry, that's very open. She uses Roman numerals in Firstborn, but after that, she just does conventional numbering as does Oppen. So here we are, the bourbon ripples of your breath. Is that right? Bourbon ripples of your breath. Yeah, and then we got the it's dark, he's bought a bowl to catch the pieces of the baby. So that's obviously a reference to
Those
uh, to stillbirth.
Those last 6 lines. Again, this is the second poem. So again, I'm coming to this, listeners. I've never read her first book. I've only seen, pieces, like a poem or two here, some of her more popular stuff. Reading the first book, I read that first poem, which is called The Chicago Train. Not a great poem, but like I said at the beginning, I was shocked, just absolutely shocked by this kind of energy rating off of it, but also kind of her lack of precision that she became known for later in her life. And then I got to the second poem, The Egg, here. And I was reading it and I was like, okay, okay, okay. And then I got to those last 6 lines and I was reading it out loud to myself. I just so happened, I don't always do this, but I just so happened because this one was a longer one and I was trying to, get into it here, the second poem of the book. And I read those last 6 lines, like the thing is hatching. Look, the bones are bending to give way. It's dark. It's dark. He's brought a bowl to catch the pieces of the baby. And I just read it and I was just like, my God, like, and I would say that this poem, there's because it's longer and because it's in these sections, there's ebbs and flows. So there's like strong points and weak points as it kind of makes its way weaving back and forth. And then it just ends in this super strong place with that image, the way she like put it on the lineation here, the way you
Yeah.
really saw that first glimpse of, oh my God, you can see what she's going to become in these next couple books as we get
Well, I think
further and
she's,
further. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds very violent, but I
Yes.
think what she's trying to do is to reach into baby symbolism, because she's trying to get back to her dead sister and to experience something of what might have happened to her dead sister. So although it sounds quite violent, babies being, I mean, it's nothing to what's ahead of us.
Yeah.
although it sounds quite violent, I think it's what she's trying to do is to create a sympathetic bridge, if she can, with her sister. I think that's what she's trying to do. But it just gets buried. She doesn't really go for it. It's just sort of
Right.
mentioned
There's a
and then it goes in and
hesitancy.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it
And the
maybe because
first,
she's young, maybe because she's only
yeah,
25 and isn't willing to
yeah,
go there with it just
yeah. And
yet. Like,
she's thinking about, she's thinking about all kinds of different babies. I mean, I thought the first poem, The Chicago Train, which has got this another really unpleasant, we've got to start finding some
yeah,
words
yeah,
nice soon. But, there they sat as though paralysis preceding death. There's two. She's in a train carriage and she's watching these. She's seen these two. This couple, a mother and her baby. Skull across the armrest while the kid got his head between the mama's legs and slept. The poison that replaces air took over, and there they sat, as though paralysis preceding death had nailed them there. The track bent south. I saw her pulsing crotch, the lice rooted in the baby's hair. Now, there's no need to do that, was there? And I wondered actually, there's that famous poem, isn't it? The Itinerant Mother, is it? I wondered if that is what it's by The Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange, 1936. I wondered if it was based on that. I mean, she published some of her first poems in Mademoiselle magazine. Well, I can't see them. I can't see them accepting this one. Can you?
yeah, 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 exactly.
Yeah, but I think it might have been based on that. So it's got a more historic sort of feeling to it. Did you see this? I don't think she saw it. I think it's she's grabbed at it as an image of a baby in trouble or a baby being vulnerable, and I think that's what she's saying. But it's her first published poem. She's put it at the front, reference to a baby, and there are quite a lot of references to babies in Firstborn. And in her later work, those babies become souls, not babies so
Yeah.
much. So I think she's talking about the sort of, the boundary between the baby and the non-baby.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And then and the different ways that they interact with each other. So there's the physical, actual person, but then there's the stuff all around that, like some people would call it essence, right? Like what makes the person a person, like the intangibles. And I mean, this is what poetry is all about, the hard to describe little things about humanity and stuff. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. And I mean, we never even touched on hesitate to call. And I know this is one where I used it almost as an example of what I was talking about. Like when I came across it, like, and this is on page 9 in the very first collection she ever published. And
I
that's where I
don't
kind
personally,
of,
Andrew, I don't think a young father should be reading poems like this.
yeah. Well, it's interesting too with that. Like, I mean, I've noticed, especially since my daughter was born, there is an elevated sensitivity that I now have. And I was always kind of, what they call a sensitive young man. I was always kind of more in touch with emotional things than let's say the average person.
Yeah,
But that has jumped to an 11, right? Like that has
yeah,
jumped
it
up
does. Yeah,
very highly. Like even I've noticed dumb movies that aren't supposed to be these big dramatic, tearjerker things. A stupid action movie can choke me up if the daughter or the child's in trouble or something. Like it just, and I never experienced that. And so now I've been thinking about it when I read, especially if we're reading a complete works like this, the pre-having children, the post having children. Like, and I used to think of that as, oh, that's silly, until I've experienced it for myself. And it's like, there is a complete shift. And
yeah,
not just in, yeah, of
yeah.
course, all the usual things, you're taking care of a baby, et cetera, et cetera. But I think on the emotional side, like there has been a distinct shift in just how sensitive I am to certain things, how certain things resonate. And I think that it's undeniable. Um, and I've had this wild theory for a while. I'll just toss it out there. I've been thinking about it since I've been coming over this emotions, and we don't have to get into this theory, but it's I'm just going to throw it out there to listeners in terms of, there's this sense that I think a lot of people feel where that they feel that art and literature and movies and all that stuff used to be better. Like it used to be a lot better than it is right now in the contemporary stuff. And I was thinking, why is that? Of course, there's thousands of reasons probably why that is. But then I was thinking, maybe it's because like all of these artists, writers, creators, like they're not having children anymore. Like they're not having children and they're not connecting at that emotional
Ooh,
level.
there's an idea.
We're back in the day. Back in the day, even the gay guys had kids, like because they were, they were hiding their sexuality. So even they had like biological children and felt this kind of thing. And it's just interesting. I don't know. Again, it's a crazy theory. I know it's hard to prove. I was just thinking about it more and more as I got to sense this dramatic shift. And maybe we'll talk about it when we get to Glick's post-child, after she had her children, and maybe if it's shifted anything in her poetry, look at it from that angle. But I don't know. I've just been thinking about that in that sense. But
Well, yeah, I'm just looking for my open actually because where have I put it? Oh, here it is. Because
got to keep it
yeah,
close by. I said,
yeah,
Damon sleeps. Damon's got it on his nightstand now. He's been, yeah.
David's open. Yeah. I mean, there's a line here. Have I written it down about that uh that it's only that the children, that only the children speak in the world, not
Right.
not the adults. Yeah. And I'm probably not going to find it very quickly, um but yeah, that's it's such a beautiful line, really. And he just sort of comes out with it. And I think, that's an expression of your idea, isn't it? But I
Yeah.
mean, why would that why would that exactly follow if people are having less children, which of course they are? Why would it follow that that idea that art and culture, literature were better in the past?
Right.
How are you connecting those two?
So I'm connecting them, I guess, through this kind of, it's interesting. There's this, I always pull out this quote from Jordan Peterson, again, who's somewhat controversial over here in the States. I think he's controversial internationally as
Sure,
well. But
sure
yeah,
is.
yeah. He said this thing, and this was years ago, and he just said it in passing, but it really resonated with me, where he was asked, why you should have kids. And he, of course, took kind of a weird approach, which is his style, but from a kind of psychological evolutionary standpoint, he kind of answered it in that way, where he said, having children, he said, is 1/3 of what it means to be alive, of what it means to be human. So, you have your usual stuff. You have your relationships, you have your career, you have, whatever it is that makes up your life. He's like, that's about 2/3 of what it means to be alive, having a
Yeah.
passion or a hobby and then a career and a wife or a spouse or something like that, a significant other. That feels good. That's a huge part of being alive. He's like, the other third that most people are missing now is that having your own offspring and raising them to be of age, kind of. And he said that is a third of what it means to be a human being and to experience the world. And he argues that, children open up the world to you in this way where you don't see the world the same way. Whereas you reach a point where you're almost bored with the world. You know what's going to happen. You've seen all this before. And then all of a sudden you have a little baby who's never seen any of this before. And you're starting to show them these things that you already know about. And it kind of reinvigorates your passion, reinvigorates maybe how you would see things. So that's how I kind of connected, I would say. And I know that's a
It
long
is true.
explanation. Yeah, that you just kind of, there is a
Yeah.
deeper emotional resonance that I suddenly feel. And the only reason I think I feel that is because I have this little baby that's still in my heart, and this kind of, there's all kinds of biology to this. There's all kinds of evolution. As I know, the sciencey explanation is, there's been millions of years of evolution that make you feel that way. Okay. Like there's a reason you feel that way. And I don't know. And I feel like maybe the absence of that, because I think about it in terms of writing, right? I use it as an example of this story that I wrote a few years ago. I never published it. Maybe I will, but it's just this kind of, I wrote it about a Christmas gift, and it was about this kid that was really excited for Christmas, and his parents get him the wrong Christmas gift. And I was just thinking, I wrote that from the child's perspective only, because I'd never been in the situation where you're the parent that accidentally gets the wrong gift or the wrong color or whatever it is, for the present that the
Yeah.
kid was desperate to get that Christmas. And I
Yeah.
was just thinking to myself, like, yeah, like you're completely cut off from that. You're still in that child mindset until
Yeah.
you have your own and you experience the parental role. And I wonder if, and again, this is just a theory, listeners that are going to jump down my throat. It's just like, if
I
if
think
if
it's
you're missing that,
I
it's a shallower story. It's a shallower poem. It's a shallower movie. It's a shallower, and I don't know, maybe we're missing that kind of It's a Wonderful Life emotional depth kind of thing where I don't know. I don't know. That's just my theory on maybe
no, I
one
think
theory of thousands that could
I think
explain. Yeah.
I think Firstborn might bear that out, because I think that these references to babies, if you didn't know and you don't know, there's no reason at all why a reader picking up Firstborn would know that Glick had an older sister who died 7 days after she was born. Um, unless you knew that, you would think she was just being, extremely um extremely cruel, really, about,
Almost in a cheeky kind of way. Yeah.
yeah, about babies and small children and infants. And you think, well, why would I want to read this? I don't like it. Quite right. And you could say that about Glick, because she hadn't had a child of her own at that point. So maybe she wasn't feeling that incredible sense of protectiveness that is awoken in you when you have a child, and you
Yeah.
think, well, not only did we produce this ourselves, but um, there's a kind of, we're all bonded in this kind of mutual responsibility, sense of responsibility. And I mean, the first time your child falls over, and this hasn't happened to you yet, I don't think, Andrew. First time your child falls over in the street, you just go, "Oh no,
Right.
how did that happen?"
Right. Yeah. Oh, I'm a terrible parent. I could have prevented it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think, maybe if Firstborn had been published after Glick had had children, she wouldn't have done it in the right way, but she would have done it in a different way. But her poetic mission, she's on a different track, and for her, it's all grist to the mill, really. It's this is what I'm trying to say, and in a sense, I don't know how she got away with it, really, because I mean, she's always been loved by the critics, but this book could have been taken apart as somebody who's written by
Yeah.
sort of part psychotic, anti maternal,
And I think you can see like
deeply excoriating woman who was, who had to be marginalized henceforth in the world of poetry. But somehow that didn't happen to her. She got away with it.
and there's kind of that this she gets away with it because even that, like I mentioned, that sloppiness, there's a sloppiness to this first book, but it's
Yeah.
kind of an exhilarating sloppiness. Like, it's kind of like a so playful in a way that it's kind of like exhilarating reading how maybe again it's just me kind of projecting from her later career because I'm coming to it almost backwards, reading her grand masterpieces and then coming to her first early work. So maybe it's that,
Yeah.
but there's just this rawness to it. And you
Well, I
mentioned
think we're
hesitate
yeah,
to call. That's the first
yeah,
poem I noticed it where I was like, there's something. I wasn't crazy about that poem, wasn't crazy about any of the ones I had read leading up to that point, but then I was just like, man, there's something here. There is something drawing me into this that I can't quite put my finger on. And I was
yeah.
thinking it's this kind of rawness to it that's just so exhilarating,
Well, should we should
despite
we
the,
should
yeah.
we go to the should we go to the edge? ABCD edge 19. Okay, so this is just to show that Louise Glück isn't just horrible about young infants. 19. Do you want to read that one, Andrew?
Sure, I'll read it out. Yeah, the
Yeah, go on
edge.
then. Yeah.
Time and again, I tie my heart to that headboard while my quilted cries harden against his hand. He's bored. I see it. Don't I lick his bribes, set his bouquets in water? Over mother's lace, I watch him drive into the gourd roasts, deal slivers in his mercy. I can feel his thighs against me for the children's sakes. Reward? Mornings, crippled with this house, I see him toast his toast and test his coffee hedgingly. The wastes my breakfasts.
Okay, so when I first started this review, I put together a lot of Glick's poems into sets, and they didn't have very original titles. There's Body and Soul, Dark Psychiatry, Classical Greek Poetry and Mythology, Anorexia Poems, Important Poems, Very Important Poems, Attack the Husband Poems. Okay, so The Edge is an Attack the Husband poem, and it's I think it could be her first Attack the Husband poem, and she's got a great selection of Attack the Husband poems, which we'll get to. Purple Bathing Suit being my favorite. I want to look that one up later, but it just doesn't bode well, does it? This poem, it's not going to have a happy ending. They aren't going to be, they aren't going to. They're falling out of love already, and it's not going to last much longer.
Yeah, and there is a style in contemporary poetry, especially when divorce became kind of commonplace in the US. There is like, I don't want to say it's a genre, but like a style of poetry writing where, like you said, kind of attack the husband style of
Attack the
writing, where
Husband. Yeah.
there's this kind of almost a numbness to it. And I think it does speak, I think, to a lot of what maybe women were feeling at that time at the mid 20th century there. So I think it's important, but it's still like, yeah, there is this kind of style of poem, and I see it in other big prominent kind of female contemporary writers.
But do you feel that's happening now? Because people are almost bending backwards to be nice about everybody, aren't they?
Unless you're well, yeah. I mean, there's rules to that, though. Yeah, there's you be nice.
I'm going to read.
Yeah.
This could be a moment to read one of your. Well, I know how much you admire Sharon Olds.
Yeah.
So now her famous collection is called Stag's Leap.
Right.
Sharon Olds, I don't know. She's probably in her 80s by now, isn't she? I should think.
Yeah, she's up there. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a much loved American poet,
contemporary of Glick's, especially around the same time her
really?
first book came out.
Contemporary, really?
Well, when did Stag's Leap come in? That was like right after. Was that 70?
No, it was much more recent because she won the T.S. Eliot for that. I think it's sort of 2016 or something. Just from memory or something like that.
Okay. What am I thinking of? I touch on it in that episode. It all blurs together eventually, Damon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is her. Now, she got criticized in Stag's Leap for because basically her husband sort of decided that was enough as she was walking out, and they used to drink this wine together in the evenings, which was called Stag's Leap, which is why she called the collection Stag's Leap. And she could have filled it with poems like The Edge or Purple Bathing Suit, but she didn't. I'm just going to read you the end of this poem. And this poem's called Single Lady's Ode. Okay. And my fortune was such that I did nothing with a man which I did not want to do. If I'd been more adventurous, I could have done things with men I did not love, who did not love me, but I did not want to. It seemed too extreme a trust to give. So I've done it with hardly anyone, done it a lot with hardly anyone. Well, I've lost my taste for my ex. Over these years since he left, he seems covered with her now, covered with her. So what I missed most is not the representative of its kind. I miss the man I have in mind, the brain and soul behind, the organ that comes inside, the man I have not met yet. So that's another way of talking about it, isn't it? Without sort of personalizing it to the incredible degree that Glick does. But it's like, you put one foot wrong and with Glick, and you're going to end up in a really quite a violent poem. And I should think that, it's a really extraordinary characteristic of her poetry. People who come into her lives in poetry. I mean, from what I can gather, she was very friendly, very popular teacher, very well balanced. She didn't go off the deep end with her students, but in her poetry, it's very, very different because you're being crushed in these huge psychic forces. And there's something about her partnerships with men that is like doomed. And I haven't really understood what it is.
It's interesting. My theory on that is when you're a beautiful woman and you're kind of constantly batting men away, you have a much different perspective than if you're kind of an average looking or even an ugly. And again, we're not saying this to be mean, listeners. We're just talking about, being attractive, et cetera, et cetera. And you see this with a lot of beautiful, especially female poets. I think you can, it's just a different everyday experience where like when you're as gorgeous as Louise, and maybe we'll put a picture up here when we're release this so people can see, like when you see Louise Glück, especially at the age of 25. I mean, shit, when she was in her 70s, she was gorgeous. Okay, like she was still gorgeous up until the day she died. She was a beautiful woman. And I just think that's a little bit different than if you're average, and I mean, men can probably experience this too. If you're, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not like a very attractive, I don't think I'm ugly, but I'd say I'm average. Okay. So there's this kind of, you have a very different experience.
Your daughter loves you. Your daughter loves you, Andrew.
Loves me no matter what, right? Yeah, like my mother.
She thinks you're incredibly handsome.
Yeah, just like my mother. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And my wife too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they all love me, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that is something when you see it, and even Sharon Olds in her youth, I think quite striking. She had this kind of not as kind of classic beauty as Glick, but there was a striking beauty to her. And I think when you're constantly batting away men that are trying to come up and talk to you, you're kind of every time you leave your house, you have to deal with some stranger on the subway or something, trying to ask you out. And it gets annoying. And you start to view this kind of men as this parasitic thing. I don't know. I think it is a little different when you're a beautiful woman. I don't know because I don't have experiences. Any women out there who know this better than us, me and Damon, please feel free to leave it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. But there
is a kind of a balance with what I call the lane in bed poems, which is another set. She does these lane in bed poems, and it's almost like her sort of like it's like a vaccine almost. It's like a love vaccine. So she's saying, although I'm probably going to write this horrible poetry about you, there were some times when I was deeply in love, when we were deeply in love, and so I'm writing this poem as well. I mean,
you can get cynical because you find yourself in that position, right? Where you're the object of all these different people you've never met, strangers on the street. You're now the object of their desire. I don't know. That gives you it is a powerful position to be in. Like kind of you have control over this, and you can decide, to lay in bed or whatever. If you wanted to, you can decide to do it with somebody you don't love, like kind of the Sharon Olds poem was going through. You can make all those decisions, kind of. I don't know. It's a power that is inherently female, I guess.
Well, I think it's an aspect. I think it's an aspect of this first collection. So she's touching on what she can do. So she thought I'm just going to write a poem about how annoyed we were with each other, or how annoyed I was with my husband at breakfast that day, and just see where it goes. And then suddenly she found that she could conjure up this language around a domestic scene, which really suited her purposes because she wants to use a lot of violent language in reference to her mother, and she wants to draw on themes of the kitchen. And now she's finding that she can write a poem like this about her husband and express her annoyance, just total annoyance. I mean, not just frustration or anything like that, but bitter resentment. She can actually express that in a very small poem. I mean, this is what, like 12 lines long. Is it sonnet? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11. No, not quite. She doesn't care about metrics. And I think she's just trying. She's just searching for what she can do, really. And you get little bits and pieces, but it doesn't make, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense. And it doesn't make a lot of sense because you don't know about her background, you don't know about her sister, you don't know about her family, and you don't know about Oppen either. So it's all a bit, very discombobulating.
Do you think any of the poems, especially in this first collection, I think are like, would you call any of them like persona poems, or that was starting to become a thing? I'm thinking of like the Randall Jarrell's kind of what's that poem, At the Market, or whatever the hell it is, where he's embodying the woman who's aged out of her beauty and she's kind of going through a grocery store, and it's kind of a depressing poem, but it talks about her basically thinking about how all these men used to come up to her all the time and now they don't because she's older, kind of thing. But it's written by a man, Randall Jarrell, like, in the mid 20th century here, near there. I don't know.
Think she does.
Yeah,
I think she does go. I think she does go to personas like these three fates, for example, the three sisters, the fates, and she does it quite a lot in mythology. I mean, one moment she's Persephone, and then the next moment she's Louise Glück again.
And I was thinking,
one minute she's Louise Glück, the next moment she's her dad's sister, that sort of thing.
I was thinking specifically, and you talked about poems kind of pairing up, and then we talked about the kind of historical turn in this first book, which I think is there in the second section here.
Yeah, let's go. Where do you think that comes?
Oof, that's tough to pick. So here we have, I didn't notice it, I think, until around where did I find that? I didn't start picking it up until I got to the third section when I realized the shift has occurred. So when I got to Cottonmouth Country, I had to go back and kind of notice it. I think it maybe starts around here in the second section where I said these two poems that I wanted to kind of talk about in tandem: Grandmother in the Garden on page 20 and Pictures of the People in the War on page 21, where I think it's an obvious historical thing. And I think these might be where she's embodying a little bit more persona, even if there's confessional elements to it or whatever. There's just kind of, both seem kind of more historical up until this point as you read through the correction. Now we're kind of going into the historical. And kind of beyond the kind of feminist sex stuff that she's kind of known for, and like you said, woman lying down style poems or whatever.
Well, should we try one of these two then? Which one would you like to read?
Yeah, let's do well, it really doesn't matter which one, because they kind of do the same thing here, but let's just start with Grandmother in the Garden here.
Okay.
And again, this is one where I think maybe the title is being so straightforward it's almost deceiving. Like it's literally setting you up with just Grandmother in the Garden.
You just totally, oh right, this is a poem about grandmothers in gardens then, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
I mean, I'm not particularly familiar with this poem, but I doubt it's about grandmothers in gardens. But anyway.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, off you go, Andrew.
Yeah, the grass below the willow of my daughter's wash is curled with earthworms, and the world is measured into row on row of unspiced houses, painted to seem real. The drugged Long Island summer sun drains, patterned from those empty sleeves beyond my grandson, squealing in his pen. I have survived my life. The yellow daylight lines the oak leaf, and the wire vines melt with the unchanged changes of the baby. My children have their husband's hands. My husband's framed, propped, bald framed, my husband's framed, propped bald as a baby on their pianos. My tremendous man. I close my eyes, and all the clothes I have thrown out come back to me, the hollows of my daughter's slips. They drift. I see the sheer summer cotton drift, equivalent to air.
That's sneaky, isn't it? The hollows of my daughter's slips,
Yeah, yeah.
the hollows of the ships. That's a famous image of the Iliad, isn't it? The hollows of the hollow ships. That's
She
so
knows what she's doing.
sneaky.
Yeah, she knows what she's doing. Yeah, like that's it's everywhere too. And it's so subtle. It's so artistically subtle that it's
Yeah,
so tasteful. It doesn't overpower the poem. She's not
but
leaning on it too heavily to give the
but a
poem
lot of
meaning.
people are not going to get that. They don't know
That's
that the
true.
the
Yeah,
hollow ships
that's
is
true.
one of the major. I mean, it's almost like a private language in a sense.
And
And
that's
I think that's the way she hides her titles. Like I think she's hidden Firstborn as
right.
a title. She's totally hidden it. You're not going to get this. You're not going to work it out. I'm calling it Firstborn. You know, and nobody's really going to figure that out. Not unless they spend an awful lot of time reading my poetry. You know. So what do and I have survived my life. I mean, that's one of her famous lines, isn't it? I have
Yeah.
survived my life. But she's put it into the mouth of a grandmother. So what do you think about this poem?
It's interesting. Every time you read it here with this kind of looking back, there's always this looking back element when you're talking about old age or something like that, a reflective element. So when you have a grandmother as the main speaker, she's setting up here, you're automatically assuming that it's baked into it. And then you come across a line like that, I have survived my life. It's not surprisingly untender, right? Compared to some of these tender images around that line.
Mm.
The yellow daylight lines, the oak leaf, like the kind of the squealing in his pen beyond my grandson, that these kind of
I would challenge those tender. I'd
well,
rather
yeah,
keep the word
right. No,
tender. I don't think Louise Glück is tender in any way. I mean, I think she's sort of sentimental,
yeah. And that's maybe
but
a better word for it. But yeah, it's just a little different than the other lines with that. I
yeah,
have
yeah,
survived
yeah, yeah,
my life.
yeah,
And
sure.
it kind of throws in there the kind of it's doing a lot of work, right? Where I have survived my life, not have I have lived my life, I have enjoyed my life, I've survived.
You see, that's absolutely typical, isn't it? I expect there are lots of people who have that as a tattoo, you know, and she's actually not even talking about herself. She's talking about her grandmother. She's talking about a grandmother,
Right. Yeah.
and I don't think she's talking about her grandmother. Her grandmothers, I think I read out in the beginning, they came to the US in 1900. Um, I think what was it on the paternal side? I think it was
Probably.
on
I
the
mean, that
paternal
was
side.
that was
Yeah. So I
the
mean,
huge last
they
big huge immigration wave until
so they were Jewish.
1910-ish,
Yep, yep,
1914-ish. Yeah.
yep. And Louise Glück is Jewish, so they were Hungarian Jews, and they came over to the US in 1900. And we don't know the circumstances because biographical information about Louise Glück is very, very scarce as far as I can tell. Um, I have survived my life. So, but what's going on? The grass below the willow of my daughter's wash. What does that mean? That's another phobic. That's another water phobic thing, isn't it? The grass below the willow of my daughter's wash is curled with earthworms. What does that mean, daughter's wash? Does that mean it's not laundry, is it? The grass below, yes, it is laundry.
Yeah, I would say
The
laundry or
grass,
even like
yeah, yeah,
the suds left over from a bath or
yeah.
something, or
But
doing laundry either.
because she's got a water phobia, she turns it from laundry to wash. The grass below the willow of my daughter's wash is curled with earthworms. So that's okay. The garden underneath the grass, there's lots of earthworms, and to just hang out the laundry. And the world is measured into row and row of unspiced houses painted to seem real. Hmm. Painted to seem real. Unspiced houses. The drugged Long Island summer sun drains pattern from those empty sleeves, the empty sleeves of the shirts, I guess, and the blouses on the line. Beyond my grandson squealing in his pen. Pen meaning caricot, crib, not crib, a playpen. I have survived my life. So this is a moment in the life of a grandmother, and I think it's an imagined figure.
Right.
I think. Although she did have a grandmother and a grandfather, like I
Or even a
guess. So
historical figure, you could say, and just maybe even just like a historical stand-in for the grandmother of, because I mean that wasn't an uncommon tale, right? Like even my family came over late 19th century, like there
right,
was a
yeah,
huge wave of immigration, and they were usually fleeing
yeah.
some type of devastation, or they were just looking for economic opportunity or whatever,
Still
yeah,
still
yeah.
are, yeah. And the wire, the yellow daylight lines the oak leaf, and the wire vines melt with the unchanging changes of the baby. Why is the baby not changing? The wine, the wire vines melt with the unchanging changes. I've got a dark thought about that. My children have their husband's hands. My husband's frame propped his balls baby on their piano. My tremendous man. I close my eyes, and all the clothes I have thrown out come back to me. The hollows of my daughter's lips. I can imagine I bet she hugged herself when she wrote that line. The hollows of my daughter's lips, they drift. I see the sheer summer cottons drift, equivalent to air. It's a quite nice poem, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, and the images that it
Yeah,
evokes of kind of using the
yeah,
clothes and the clothesline, the act of doing laundry as this moment of I have
yeah,
survived my life, and so much is packed into this. We have what, three generations packed into this, where we have the grandmother who's
yeah,
associated as the speakers talking about her daughters and the children and their husbands and now her grandchildren, kind of this, it's so much of like an entire life almost fit into this little short poem, with the act of doing laundry is this. And I mean, this is one of the great things about poetry, is an occasion for a poem. This is something you'll hear in poetry classes, where I've had
yeah.
teachers say this, or like, what's the occasion of this poem, or what inspires you for this poem, or what inspired, what sparked it off. And I just think the occasion of doing laundry and making it this deep, reflective, historical thing is just brilliantly done. And even this one, I think, in the second half, and this is where I started asking myself, I wonder when these poems were individually published before she published them in the collection, like all together, because this is where I think that shift was starting. I had to go back and kind of reread and be like, where do I feel this shift? I think it was right around here with the kind of grandmother in the garden in the second section. And we kind of do this kind of a little bit different than the first section of the book. More historical, more reflective, more using something like I mean, there was always this domestic stuff, like we said, the kitchen scenes and stuff like that, and spouses talking in the kitchen, whatever. But I think now we have this kind of domestic scene that starts to branch very far, and not just like branch off a little bit. I mean, like put a huge three generations of family history into a short little poem like this.
Yeah, I guess it's a very American poem in that sense, isn't it?
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
That's interesting too, in terms of the distinction, right? Especially when you think about the time. And it's funny because so many of us, we learn about these countries, especially on the American side of things, with like, my perspective is always American. Yeah, of course. When you learn about like British history and all that, you usually have to take an entire section of on it, an entire year of it, usually in most American high schools. There is this sudden shift, maybe because America is such a young country, maybe because in the 20th century a lot of Europe and the UK was still spent many years recovering from the kind of destruction of World War II that the US was kind of exempt from, that it did become kind of, the America became the kind of picturesque domestic, suburban kind of life with, the pink ovens or whatever, the kind of images from that time. Whereas if
mm,
you took those images from I mean, not everywhere, right? But if you took those images from parts of London or whatever at the same time, I mean, there's still like buildings and rubble or whatever from the Blitzkrieg. And it just, I don't know. Because I had a friend on here who's from Brighton. We were doing James Bond stuff, and he was just talking about like when James Bond was
mm,
published in the 50s, how much the food was
yeah,
very important, the descriptions of the
yeah,
food, because he was talking about at that time, he's like, in the UK, we were still rationing, 10 years after the war, we were still rationing because we were still in the reconstruction phase of
yeah.
that. So food became this exotic thing that was like enticing and became important in more British literature than it did previously. I don't know, just something like that. I don't know if something happened in that time period. Maybe it has to do with the kind of lingering effects of the kind of war. Maybe it has to do with America becoming the global superpower that it did in kind of the mid 20th century there, post World War II. I don't know, but for some reason, this domestic started to become, like you said, this kind of picturesque, very American style and I don't know. I mean, maybe the distinction isn't important, but I don't know. I think I was just
Yeah, she's
interesting that you
managed to
said
pack
that.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's managed to pack in the babies, hasn't she? So she's got 3 babies. I still don't know what that line means. And the wire vines melt with the unchanged changes of the baby. Unchanged. Hang on.
It's,
Unchanged changes. Okay. Did they still have nappies? They must have had nappies then, right? So she's referring to the laundry again, isn't she?
I would think that because they were not the
Yeah.
disposable diaper world that I'm living in right now. Yeah, it
Okay,
was the
so that's a relief.
reusable washing, have to
Okay.
soak the shit and piss out of it and then
Okay.
wash it.
So for once,
Yeah, the cloth
it's
diapers. Yeah,
it's actually quite a sweet image
but
then.
but I think it's both. I think it could be, but this is the brilliance of Glick, and I mean, this is the fun of poetry too. And I think the modernists really. This is why I think a lot of people struggle when they come to the modernists in high school and something, and they're like, "Oh, read The Wasteland," and you read it, and you're kind of like, "What the hell is going on?" If you don't know what you're looking
Yeah,
at, because it works on so many different levels. You can read it just
yeah.
straight through and make no connections, and it still makes sense, sure. But then you can read it through and find these connections, and then it makes sense in these 4 or 5 different ways, however you want to read it. And maybe it's a little bit of a word game. I think a criticism that poetry gets a lot is that it's just word games. And to some extent it is, like some extent it is just a little bit of playing around with words, grouping them together, and kind of, yeah, maybe even throwing some metrics, yeah, some meter in there, some rhyme in there, using a received form, whatever it is.
Sometimes there's
Yeah.
sometimes it's just whatever you need to get to what you're trying to say, really. And like Oppen said in the beginning, as I quoted, there is that one word which one must define for oneself, us. So if you're trying to define what it is, if you're trying to define what us is, it's not going to be bum bam bing, is it? It's not going to be, oh yeah, we can do that. That's not difficult. I mean, that
Yeah.
requires books. It requires long poems. It's a very challenging and complex concept, the concept of us.
Yeah.
And so if poems use a lot of words, you know, like in Amadeus, Mozart used a lot of notes, didn't he?
Oh yeah.
You could be right, actually, Andrew, because the edge is in section 2. So the
Yeah.
book's got 3 sections, hasn't it? The edge is in section 2, and that's the opening poem, and that certainly makes you sit up. And then you've got Grandmother in a Garden next to it. So yeah, you could be onto something there. And I like the Racer's Widow. I like that piece.
Yeah.
And then Bridal Piece, you see, again, that's her being incredibly tricksy. So do you remember the Forms of Love that you read by Oppen?
Vaguely.
Do you remember that poem when we did it? Okay, so
Let's do a
you read
refresher.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you read it very well. Parked in the fields all night, so many years ago, we saw a lake beside us. When the moon rose, I remember leaving that ancient car together. I remember standing in the white grass beside it. We groped our way down together, downhill in the bright, incredible light, beginning to wonder whether it could be lake or fog. We saw our heads ringing under the stars. We walked to where we would have wet our feet had it been water. Do you remember reading that?
Vaguely, yeah. It came back to me a
Vaguely.
little. It's funny. I was just on another podcast and they asked me, like, "Oh, what episodes have you done recently?" And I was thinking, I was like, "What episodes have I done recently? What the fuck did I read like 2 months
It's all
ago?"
merging.
Yeah.
You've got young father's brain. Well, do you want to read Bridal Piece, which
Where's
is
the next page? Okay,
page
yeah.
page 24. So
24. Sure, yeah.
that's 2 poems after. So trying to bear what you can in mind from Oppen's Forms of Love.
All right, Bridal Piece. Our honeymoon, he planted us by water. It was March. The moon lurched like searchlights, like his murmurings across my brain. He had to have his way, as down the beach the wet wind snored. I want my innocence. I see my family frozen in the doorway. Now, unchanged, unchanged. Their rice congeals around his car. He locked our bedroll in the trunk for laughs later at the deep ugh, I hate this break, at the deep end. Rockaway, he reaches for me in his sleep.
Rockaway, he reaches for me in his sleep. So the two poems use all the same imagery: the moon, the lake, the car, um, the murmurings across the brain is kind of like the torchlight. You could see that as the downhill. It's kind of the wet wind. It's kind of there to where we would wet our feet in forms of love, and here the beach, the wet wind. It's her saying, "I know about Oppen and I know about the forms of love," and it's almost like a sort of it's almost like a fake forms of love, except, and I don't know how conscious it is. I mean, I hadn't noticed until you actually read it. That line, "I want my innocence," that kind of stands out, doesn't it? I want my innocence. And that's the turning point of the poem where instead of with Oppen, where it, to use my word for Oppen, tender, instead of staying tender all the way through, it becomes very untender at that point, doesn't it? I see my family frozen in the doorway now unchanged. Their rice conceals around his car. I think that means wedding rice, doesn't it? So the consequences of their marriage, which includes everything that happens afterwards.
If it got stuck in crevices and then it rained and the rice swells and turns to mush or whatever, yeah, congealing around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He locked our bedroll in the trunk for laughs. Was she married by the? I don't think she got married 26, age 26, I think.
So before this book, yeah.
So I don't know who the he is, whether that's her husband or her father. It's probably,
or if it's a persona of
just
like a
boyfriend.
bridal, yeah, boyfriend, or just kind of imposing this kind of persona of the
Later at the
freshly
deep end.
married maiden,
Yeah. Later
which
at
we
the
could
deep
say is
end.
mythology if we're talking about the maidens and kind of the maiden. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that deep. It's not as deep in this poem. Yeah, like
No,
with
it's
the
not. No, I
mythology,
think
but
the
yeah,
main.
yeah.
I think the main thing is she read Forms of Love. She really admired it. She knew she couldn't write a poem that stayed tender all the way through. So the first part of it, I think, is Forms of Love, and then it sort of clatters into lots of different spirals down, doesn't it? Into the reality of a lot of male female relationships, especially if you cast it in the way that you did, with her having to deal with unwanted attentions or just feeling that she was vulnerable because she knew that she had a certain allure that attracted men, and she didn't want that allure.
I talked about this with a little bit, again, continuing the series on the podcast. There's so many now I'm losing track, listeners, with the Anne Saxton complete that I'm still working on. We're working on it, listeners, with Sarah Fletcher, poet, another British poet over there in the UK.
Yeah.
But she said something like this too, where like when you almost get a sense as you read through Saxton's stuff too, that she almost becomes like, it's bemusing to her to toy with men a little bit. Like she kind of relishes the power she has by being this kind of beautiful woman. And then almost as you age, you get almost a little bored with it. Maybe by the time you're 25 or something and you're kind of being approached every time you leave the house, maybe you are a little bored with it and you just kind of don't care about that power. And you want to just kind of be like, oh, you, what are you going to say to me? The same guy that approached me 20 minutes ago said the same thing, like I'm bored by it. Like, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a real thing that a select number of people, if they're beautiful enough or whatever, will have to deal with it. Maybe not all of us have to deal with it.
I think it's just impossible for us to comment on it, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're all it's just speculation. Yeah.
And I sort of, I've never felt drawn to that world of, modeling and
we were the uglies. Yeah, we
female beauty. I just feel it's sort of it's you've got to put so much work into it, haven't you?
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
and
you've
it's
just
superficial,
got to be working at
and
it.
it's
I mean, I saw today some of the guests who were flying off to Jeff Bezos's wedding in Venice, and I just thought, oh God, I just couldn't put that amount of work into my wardrobe over sort of how many days they're out there. I don't know, 4 days. All that work, all that effort. Is that what a beautiful woman is? Is that what a beautiful man is?
Right. Bezos is on a lot of tea right now too, a lot of testosterone right now. He's getting some injections in the ass every 2 weeks.
I don't know. But I think that Anne Sexton, her objection was about the roles that women are expected to be assigned to,
And it was
or
a little earlier than Glick. She was a
to
little older.
self-assign,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And she was rejecting that completely, wasn't she?
And
She was
she was
rejecting the role.
kind of raised in a moderately wealthy kind of upbringing, and was raised to marry for wealth and kind of, bloodline. It was still kind of that thing, like at that time, marry a rich man who's going to take care of you because that's what you've been raised, kind of thing to do. And she, yeah, that was
But also,
yeah,
beauty changes, doesn't it,
it's
over
true. Yeah.
time? And I mean, what was beautiful, then, what's considered beautiful then, isn't necessarily what's considered beautiful now, is it? It's a different thing. Yeah, I think Anne Sexton, she's not scared of her persona, is she just puts it straight down on there, doesn't she, on the page? Yeah.
Which I think could get boring too, like as a creative, like as when you're young and you're experimenting, like Glick is here. And I think even, like I mentioned that line break when I read that one there and stuff. I noticed, and I know we haven't even gotten there yet. We probably won't get there today either. It's kind of, but whatever, that's, I said, we'll do it till we finish here, Damon. If you're willing, yeah, please.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so I'm
We
just
will keep
looking at
going as
I
many
just went.
episodes as it takes. But
I just went quiet for a moment there because I was looking at Anne Sexton's poem "All My Pretty Ones," and she's putting your theory into her mother, I think, here. So the last verse is, "I hold a 5-year diary that my mother kept for 3 years, telling all she does not say of your alcoholic tendency." So she's talking about her father. "You overslept. My God, Father, each Christmas day with your blood I will drink down your glass. Whether you are pretty or not, I outlive you. Bend down my strange face to yours and forgive you." So I think she's talking about her father as the pretty one. And she's saying there, "I will outlive you. Bend down my strange face to yours and forgive you." Yeah, that is quite a complex idea, isn't it?
yeah,
Because she's relating her her beauty to her father and saying it sort of ended in disaster for them in their family. "Now I fold you down, my drunkard, my navigator." So anyway, that's Anne Sexton, something else.
yeah. Much different. Yeah,
But interesting that she was a
yeah, yeah.
a near contemporary,
Almost, I think even for Plath, who probably the more famous one to people that don't know anything about poetry, you've heard of that name. Like she was just before this, so I mean, Glick was reading that. She was reading that stuff. She was aware of it. She's a young person into poetry. The
yeah, they
biggest
both,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they both. I'm a big Plath fan, actually.
yeah. So that'll
Yeah,
be the next attempt, maybe.
I
We'll do
don't know.
some Plath. Yeah.
So where are we? Number 9 has hesitate to call. We've got this poem that's sort of been trying to be read and hasn't succeeded. So I'm going to read it now. It's called Hesitate to Call, and it's on page 9. And I think this is an example of her speaking directly to the reader. "Hesitate to call. Live to see you throwing me aside. That fought like netted fish inside me. Saw you throbbing in my syrups." Don't know what that's about. I suppose. Well, anyway. saw saw you sleep and live to see all that flushed down. The refuse done. It lives in me. You live in me. Malignant. Love, you ever want me? Don't. I think that's her saying. I mean, it's all really mixed up in relationships and the bad parts of relationships flushed away, I suppose, and yet you can't completely evacuate yourself from those more unpleasant parts of the relationship. But I think she's saying, "Love, you don't ever want me, don't." For me, that's like saying my poetry's not ready yet. I don't know what you think about that.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously, the literal reading of this, we could say sex or something like the actual act of sex. So, kind of, yeah, the kind of like netted fish inside me, saw you throbbing in my syrups. That could be explicitly, maybe that's just us having dirty minds in the 21st century here, but I think that's
It's
there.
syrups.
Yeah.
It's syrups. It's stirrups. Do not stirrups.
And the netted fish, the kind of saw you sleep and lived to see that all flushed down, the refuge done. It lives in me, you live in me, malignant love. You ever want me? Don't.
Yeah.
And then
So
maybe she's addressing love directly. Like I'm almost maybe it's more cynical approach to almost like calling love, personifying love as this man or this thing, or even like a penis or a semen inside of it. Whatever, kind of coming. Uh, I don't know. Maybe it is cynical in that hesitate to call. Like it kind of sets us up with something, right? Like hesitate to call automatically assume some type of nervousness, distance, something that's maybe it's just because of what I knew about Glick, I automatically put in towards the relationship angle with something. When you just see hesitate to call, you think relationship. If you're reading Glick, maybe not. Maybe other readers have a different thing. But
yeah,
yeah, there's that.
I thought that I was convinced that that was what she was saying in that poem, but actually reading it back, I'm not sure. I was, love you ever want me? Don't. She's almost saying, if you're a reader or a lover, don't don't read this poem, isn't she? But she's saying, don't. She's not saying don't read this poem. I mean, she is saying it on paper. Well, she's saying something slightly because she's put it on paper. It has to be a communication from paper to us. But love you ever want me don't. It's a warning to her lover, which she could perfectly well. You can imagine her saying that. You know, if you ever wanted to love me, change your mind, don't do it. But she's not giving any more information about that. So I suppose you could take it two ways. On the page, it's more don't don't read this if you're interested in love or interested in my love of language or what I can communicate. But it does take you back into a possible real life scenario, doesn't it? Where she could be saying that
She does this.
to a boyfriend.
Glick is so good at this, where you'll be reading through the poem and maybe you'll be like, huh, I'm following, don't know about that, don't know about, and then you get to that last couple lines or the very last line, and she is so good at having that last line do so much work for everything that you read previously. Like she is a master,
Yeah,
probably the best I've ever read at that. I mean, like it is that last couple lines where it doesn't always work, especially in this first book. There are missed opportunity. Again, if you talk about a 25-year-old girl writing poetry, but there are some, especially a poem like this, Hesitate to Go, where that last line is so heavy. It packs so much punch and it's so devastating and makes you rethink all the previous lines and opens up the interpretation to all these other, she's so good
yeah,
at using that. Like it's just incredible. I mean, it's a treat to read when you keep, especially a young Glick, where I wasn't familiar with a lot of her early work. Getting familiar with it just kind of opened this possibility up to me. It was like, my God, look at this. Like, look at what she. Sometimes in the opening lines too, I've noticed like there were poems that maybe I wasn't crazy about, but there were just a couple of lines somewhere, either in the beginning or usually towards the end, that just struck me so hard that I marked them, copied them. I'm going to revisit them throughout my life. Kind of, like just like a couple lines, and that's all it takes. Just
yeah.
brings the house
No,
down on this little poem where you're like,
I
oh,
mean,
it's
it would
just a little
take a
phone
lot.
call.
It
It's
would
just a
take a lot
little.
to read. It would take a lot to read a poem like that out in public. And I mean, there are several of her poems where you think to read that out to an audience, do I really want to do that? I mean, when this guy from the Nobel Institute, what was he called? He's called Adam Smith. He was representing the Nobel Institute, and he rang her up to interview her. And it was really early in the morning, and she hadn't had any coffee, and I don't know, she just sounded really quite irritable. And then he asked her, he asked her, um, he he asked her which was her favorite books, and she said her later books.
Right.
And then he asked this question, and I mean, anybody knew anything about Glick's poetry would not have asked her this question except on the end of the telephone where she couldn't throw something at you. He said, asked her about the relationship between poetry and lived experience, and Glick answered, "Well, that was a big subject." I mean, who'd ask a question like, "What is the relationship between poetry and lived experience?" I mean, that's a huge question to ask somebody who's been, looking at that for the whole of her career. Yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, you almost. I mean, I think the courage it takes to stand up and read a poem like that, whether or not you say, oh, that's a good poem, or that's I don't like that poem, or just just the sheer viscerality of it, to use Francis Bacon reference. Just it's so visceral. But she's not always like that. We've got to present the other side of her. So I found this lovely poem by her actually called A Summer Garden in Poetry International website. It's also on Poetry Foundation, but not full text. And it's about her mother, who's finally died. Her mother lived to great age, Beatrice Glück, and she died at 101. And it's a poem in 5 sections. And I'll just read something from the last section. I'll miss out the last line. You can look that up. You can look that up yourself. That famous readers, that famous sort of Andrew Wittstadt phrase. Readers, you can look this up for yourselves. So it starts, mother has died, mother who never dies. Beatrice took the children to a park in Cedarhurst. So this is about, she's drawing on childhood memory here. Beatrice took the children, one of which was herself, to the park in Cedarhurst. The sun was shining, airplanes passed back and forth overhead, peaceful because the war was over. It was the world of her imagination, true and false were of no importance. Freshly polished and glittering, that was the world. Dust had not yet erupted on the surface of things. The planes passed back and forth, bound for Rome and Paris. You couldn't get there unless you flew over the park. Everything must pass through, nothing can stop. The children held hands, leaning to smell the roses. They were 5 and 7. Infinite, infinite. That was her perception of time. She sat on a bench, somewhat hidden by oak trees. Far away, fear approached and departed. From the train station came the sound it made. The sky was pink and orange, older because the day was over. Now, I know you haven't got the text in front of you there, Andrew, which makes it a bit difficult, but it's called A Summer Garden, and it's on Poetry International website, and also a bit on Poetry Foundation. But it goes really rather well, doesn't it, with your pick, Grandmother's Garden. It does go rather well with that, doesn't it? If you think about it. So the grandmother in the garden, it's got a lot of the same imagery, but this is a much softer, more sentimental poem. And she wrote this just after her mother died. And it's probably in one of the 2 books that we're not covering. But the thing I like about it is that it's expressing a sort of serenity to me. There's this, her mother's died, and Glick is saying in this last stanza that the memories that they had together are infinite, infinite, infinite. That was her perception of time. Now, she's incredibly critical about her mother because I think she feels that because her older sister is deceased, it took something of her mother away and buried something of her mother away that is irretrievable, and that every time her mother gets irritable with Louise Glück, she feels it's because Louise Glück isn't her, it's sort of survivor's guilt, isn't that first child. But here, there's a lot of forgiveness, a lot of serenity, freshly polished and glittering, that was the world. Dust had not yet erupted on the surface of things. It's just really beautiful. I really like the way she's set it up.
I wonder too, so if we compare a poem that she composed in her 20s to when she composed, in her 70s, 60s.
Well, I think you could do that.
Yeah.
I think you could do that with these 2 poems because you're talking about women of the same. I mean, I don't know if Therese, well, she had a son, didn't she? I don't know about Therese, her sister, younger sister, but they're both grandmothers, aren't they? Grandmother in the garden and grandmother in this poem. I mean, she says mother has died, mother who never dies, but she could equally say grandmother has died, grandmother who has never died. So they're the same person. They're symbolized in the same way by both being grandmothers.
And
And
I wonder if that
mm,
touches on my theory, Damon, about how her first one before she had children, and then this next one after she had children, and even fulfilled the role of grandmother, so had grandchildren, which is
yeah,
something
that's
even more
true.
so, right? And then like
That's
has this much tender, more forgiving look at her mother all of a sudden. And maybe it's just, when your parents die, you're going to do that anyway. But still, it's just like, I don't know.
no,
Maybe
no,
you just
that's
opened up to this
yeah,
empathy that you couldn't quite see what your mother was struggling with when you were a child until you were a mother yourself and a grandmother yourself. And you can now experience, you understand finally when it's too late, which is the ultimate irony of us, right? Of life, of
yeah,
when it's
yeah.
too late, that's when you finally discover that, oh wow, I was in my 20s, I thought so much differently than this because I just hadn't experienced. I don't know, maybe I'm
No,
trying
I
to
guess
weasel it in
no.
there, David. Yeah.
No. It's a little bit forced, but it is there, Andrew. I mean, it's a missive of time, isn't it? It's all about, and the grandmother in the garden. It finishes, and all the clothes I've thrown out come back to me. The hollows of my daughter's slips, not ships. They drift. I see the sheer summer cottons drift, equivalent to air. So she's in the garden. She's seeing the laundry, swaying in on a summer's day. Exactly. That sort of sense of long, uninterrupted time. It's exactly the same as in a summer garden, the poem, the last part of which I just read out. So, I mean, that's what makes you not want to give up on Glick. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, do you remember that? You probably don't, because you said you don't much recall about any other episodes. But do you remember I bought a village? My first Glick sort of purchase was a village life, and I was so sort of I just can't read that. I left it on the train. I told you that. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and this is what makes Glick worth reading, really, ultimately, is because you can trade her work. You can say, okay, here's a poem, um, hesitate to call, or the Chicago train, and I'm going to trade that, or that, you know, poem with a horrendous ending, Thanksgiving. You can trade that for something really quite beautiful, um, and that doesn't have that kind of stark anger.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 the more you read of Glick, the more you find your way into that kind of trading off. I mean, it's quite exhausting, I have to say. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it is exhausting. Well, maybe not exhausting is not the right word, but it's sort of
There's an
it's
exhilaration that takes a lot of energy when you
yeah,
get
it's hard.
caught
It's
up.
hard.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it is hard work.
yeah.
Particularly if you don't feel it's there, and then suddenly that it is there, and you found it, and it's fine, and that's okay. You've traded it off. Because if you're just left with this firstborn, she never wrote another book. That this is it.
Right.
She's not doing herself justice at all, because you're not getting that sweet, sentimental, lyrical side of her. I mean, unless I'm missing something. I mean, is there
No,
is there
no.
a is there a poem in Firstborn that you feel has some of that quality?
Nothing in this first book is as tender as some of that later stuff. Like even um what am I thinking? I'm thinking of, I think even that poem you read is from Faithful and Virtuous Night. Is
I
that from
wouldn't.
that?
Yeah,
That's
I'm
one of
not
her
surprised. Yeah,
later
yeah,
things where
yeah.
she does take kind of a, maybe it is age, maybe it is something like that, like where I've even noticed it being I'm in a transition point where I'm again, people get upset when I say this, especially people older than me. I'm only 35, but still I'm transitioning to middle age, and I can feel it in a bunch of different ways. Like
Are you
and
transitioning? Let me think.
well, I just
I
mean
think
like in terms of what's around me. My parents are aging. I have a child of my own.
yeah.
Like I have these others, like more responsibility. Like just kind of, you can. It's easier to be harder and cynical when you're younger. Like it's just easier. And I'm in this position position where even just a few years ago, I was still in that youthful kind of, let's be cynical about everything. Let's be a little harder, not as tender. And now I can feel almost the shift. I can see it in my own
The
work. I can
best
see it in the way I'm thinking.
the best way to think
Yeah.
about middle age is to break it down. So it's not just middle age; it's sort of early middle age,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then middle age, and then late middle age.
Yes,
And
yes.
then,
When
and
my
then,
daughter's graduating high school, will be middle. Yes, yes,
and
yes.
then
Yeah.
according to how you want to stretch those categories, I mean, it's really up to you.
Right. Yeah.
So you can say, oh yeah, I'm still in early middle age, or
So my
I
only
mean,
frame of reference is, yeah, what I'm feeling or what other people tell me usually about
it's
that. So
very
yeah,
it's very elastic, but
yeah.
it's very elastic. But I don't think it's middle age. It's just very elastic. So I think it's your early
I'm
middle
going
age
off.
problem.
I'm going off U.S. life expectancy. That's what I'm going off of here. Yeah, about halfway. I'm approaching the halfway point.
Yeah,
But I know
sure.
we're bumping up against time here, and I knew this would happen. I knew we would get too excited, and we would only be able to get into the one. We'll get a groove going. I know we'll get a groove going on the next. I know. I did want to touch
Okay.
on Cottonmouth Country before we finish up because
Well, Cottonmouth Country is
the final section of this first book.
yeah. Apparently it's some kind of a apparently it's some kind of a snake.
Yes,
Is
yes,
that
it's a
true?
very prominent. I guess it is more prominent in the United States. At least that's what we call them. Cottonmouth.
Yeah.
I think the proper name is like water moccasin. I think is what they're.
Water moccasin. There it is. Water phobia.
Yeah, and it's
Didn't
because
get
it's a
that one.
water snake. It's in marshlands and swamps. Again, we're talking salt marshes, freshwater
Yeah.
marshes. It likes that kind of stuff. Very
Yeah.
deadly, very poisonous. So if you get bitten by it, you don't have antidote or hospital treatment, you're dead within a few hours. It's a very potent kind of poison.
Lovely. Lovely.
And then
Yeah.
we have the copperheads, they call them, or the rattlesnakes in the Southwest that do something similar. But in the marshlands, it's like the cottonmouth or the water moccasin
So apparently
snake. But
so yeah, what's it got the moccasin a moccasin? What did you call it? A moccasin,
water moccasin is, I
water
think,
moccasin. So apparently they've got very dry mouths. Did you pick that up?
it's they call them cottonmouth because they're poison sacs on like how snakes have those poison sacks on
Yeah.
the, like in their cheeks basically.
Not
When
no,
it
not
opens
really.
its mouth to strike you, it looks like cotton balls. It's like this bright white fluffy like poison
Like
sacs.
snakes aren't really a big thing in the UK.
Yeah, that's true.
We've got tiny little vipers, and that's probably about the most dangerous thing. That's about the length of a pen,
So it
and
makes
that's
sense that she's Cottonmouth Country would be these kind of marshland stuff. Yeah, Nantucket, kind of beach towns.
well,
The American Gulf is kind of all of that, where it's very brackish waters.
right.
But
So
yeah,
so you've got all that phobic material, haven't you, suddenly? And I did pick up the reference to drugs, because of course you get very dry mouthed if you take drugs. And I think there are about three references to drugs directly in Firstborn. And I thought it might have some connection to that.
yeah. There's that.
Possibly.
I mean, just even the poem "Cottonmouth Country" was the one that really. I thought it was the one where I noticed everything was perfect, where she's getting into that kind of the Glick that I knew and kind of, yeah, mid-career Glick and older, where I came to it. The lines are incredibly tight. Everything's like she's not doing any kind of experimental stuff.
Do you want to do you want to read that one out,
Yeah,
Andrew?
yeah. Cottonmouth Country. So Fishbones walked the waves of Hatteras, and there were other signs that death wooed us by water, wooed us by land, among the pines, an uncurled cottonmouth that rolled on moss, reared in the polluted air. Birth, not death, is the hard loss. I know. I also left a skin there. And again, with those last lines, those last little devastating lines that shift the entire poem by the time you get to the end of it here. I know. I also
Yeah, I
left
know.
a skin there.
That's incredibly precocious, I would say, for what
And
26-year-old writer.
that's the point where I was reading the last line and I've seen, okay, the last line's doing a lot of work for this, but then that's where I kind of went back right as I got to the third section. I was like, something shifted in the second section, and I went back and started being like, okay, there's a shift here. as she and then I started thinking, well, when did she compose these? What dates and time? I'm like, we don't need to get into all that. Just it's going to take even longer. But still, I was just thinking, man, you can even see the progression in this first book, just one book, as she
Yeah.
progresses towards that final section here. And there's still a little bit of that playful, like, when she's cutting the like self hyphen, line break less or whatever, at the stuff. She's still doing a little bit of that, but it's
But
kind of going away.
you need the rest of the material, don't you? I mean, otherwise
Yeah.
you're lost. Otherwise you're lost with this. I mean, she does challenge the I. She does make the challenge in her later poetry that is it better that none of us had ever been born, which is like
Right.
a huge challenge. Is it better to be born, or better not to have been born? Again, she's putting her sister into that equation. If I can't get back to my sister, and my sister's seems to be in a region of the underworld, and I can't get to her, and her sister can't get to me, and we've got no memories because that's how things are in Hades, as far as I understand, then birth, not death, is the hard loss. So her birth means that she can't connect with her older sister, with her firstborn sister. But I mean, if you didn't, I mean, it's context, isn't it? A lot of
That
like,
and
yeah.
Well, I think it's also kind of this birth not death, obviously classic kind of literary trope. So we could sex and death or birth and death are these constant
Yeah.
kind of contradictory things that are, huge themes, all, go through Shakespeare. It's all in there. And we kind of get these, it's a more simple poem of hers where we have these kind of images. They're not even, obviously we can read into them, but okay, fish bones walked the waves of Hatteras. So, I mean, this is again, Cape Hatteras is just like a coastal barrier island off North Carolina here. So it is just think beaches,
Right.
think, yeah, sea turtles and stuff. Yeah. Bones,
Okay.
shipwrecks, stuff like that, beach houses coming up there. And there were other signs that death wooed us by water, wooed us by land among the pines. And this kind of, that there's this death around every corner kind of, and then this cottonmouth. So the snake, literally an uncurled cottonmouth that rolled on moss, reared in the polluted air. Birth, not
Yeah.
death, is the hard loss. And I was thinking even that too, like I left a skin there. So obviously there's some type of reference to not just the snake being dangerous, but to leaving a skin or a part of yourself somewhere. And I think birth, not death, is the hard loss. Maybe she could be referring to something like when you have a child, you are a part of yourself is left behind. But I mean, any type, you don't even have to do for children necessarily. You could say birth of a new you or something. You're changing something about yourself. You're shedding a skin, and you're coming out with a fresh, clean skin, or something like that. We could read into it literally like that, where you're kind of birthing something new is harder than the death of something
I
old.
think,
I don't know.
yeah, I think the fact that that skin is left in death country, I think that's what it means. And whether it's her skin or whether it's her sister's skin, I don't know. Probably her skin, because if she had been born, if she had been the firstborn, which is the title of this collection, if she had been the firstborn and she wasn't, she was the secondborn. If she was the firstborn, then she would have only had the one skin, right? And if she was going to change her persona later on, that would have happened later. But she's saying, as she was born or before she was born, she left a skin in the place that was there. And I think it must be her younger sister, or the history of herself, if she had been the firstborn, which she wasn't.
Yeah, that
If,
or even just, yeah, like I said, just as you change and you grow as a person and all that, you kind of just, you shed your old self. And you like even, when you leave your hometown, and let's say you're away for a little while, 5-10 years, and you're visiting whatever, but you're not there regularly. I noticed this in my own hometown. When I go back to it,
hmm,
it's always different. It's never quite the way I remembered it. There's a new development. The stores have changed. This place closed down and another place opened, and like it's not what I remember. It's something else, and I
but
don't know. Yeah.
I don't think she writes poetry like that, Andrew. It's almost like once you appear in a Gluck poem, you're going to appear again. That's not the first time. you know, you're going to come back. And her imagery, I think, in the same way she cottons onto Oppen a lot, she's using a lot of his imagery as we saw in the bridal piece. And I think she's beginning to create her cast of characters here. And it's in the second set, it's in the third section. It's salt marshes or marshy landscapes, as you said. And the very next poem, Phenomenal Survivals of Death in Nantucket, specifically references her sister's tiny soul. So I think it has to be that. I think it has to be that. And she's only 26,
Right.
isn't she? So, I mean, I think she did leave for New York. She would have been living in New York then, I think. I think she was doing secretarial work, wasn't she? And getting over this prolonged anorexia, which actually doesn't make an appearance in this book, does it?
It's the same thing with Joan Didion, and this kind of the women that's the great writers that suffered from anorexia never talked about it, never mentioned their eating disorders. It was for some reason just so taboo. I don't know why, but it was.
It does come up later, but it transmutes into hunger.
Right.
So she transmutes it into hunger. So that's, and there's this one horrible poem which we'll come across at some point called The Mirror, which is like, oh God, if I'd have written that, I'd never have published it. I can't imagine reading it out. It's just so awful. But anyway, that's an anorexia poem.
It's coming.
So, I mean,
it's coming, listeners.
It is coming. But you're right. She doesn't talk about it here, does she? In her first book, at all. Maybe she probably thinks I'm not going to talk about that because it's my first book of poetry, and that's taken up too much of my life. It took her 7 years to recover from it.
And I think there's a level of when you're confessing too, if you're being confessional in your work, and I know there's degrees to this, so you can be totally open book or you can be more subtle with it. I think it takes a toll on the writer too, where you're sharing this stuff. So, how much do you want to share, with that, like, do you want to be totally open? Because then you feel like you're losing yourself that way, where you become this caricature for your readers instead of, yourself. I don't know. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways, and it's going to keep coming up. Listen, I know we're bumping up against time here. I do have to run here, Damon. I know.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
But this will continue, listeners. This has been this is just the beginning. Listen, this is just the beginning of me and Damon talking about all of Louise Glück. So please stay tuned.
You see, I knew it was. A Shack meets Shack and Bed and Go. So in the last, almost the penultimate poem, she's back to babies, isn't she?
Right.
Biblical babies this time, but it's Firstborn is she's sprinkling a lot of mischievous references to babies all the way through, but actually there's only one baby she's really interested in, and that's her sister.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Before we sign off, Damon, I have to ask, so we just kind of final verdict on this first book. What are our thoughts just reading the first book, going into it, close reading it like we have and talking about it? What are your final thoughts if we haven't said them already? Kind of.
Well, we have said quite a lot. I think
here we do. Yeah.
I think I feel I've unraveled it, and I wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't have had access to the rest of her poetry.
Right.
Which is, as we were talking about, she's a what was the phrase we used? A great and mighty poet.
Right.
I mean, if I hadn't have had all that material, I think this would have been this would have been quite a spooky,
maybe a little more cryptic.
Yeah. And I wouldn't really be getting a lot of it. But once you've got a few keys in your hand and you can start to unlock it. And I love some of the examples that you chose. I mean, Grandmother in the Garden, I thought was really a lovely poem. And I like the way that it connected to, one of her last collection poems. So I think she described this poem. She said, this book, she said to the journalist, Adam Smith again, keeps on popping up, doesn't he? The Nobel Prize guy. She said, you would only read Firstborn to feel contempt.
Yeah.
And I think she's being unnecessarily harsh on herself. I think there's definitely, a few poems, like I always feel this about Glick, why did you have to put that one in?
First,
it's in the wrong place. I just, it just doesn't feel right, or else it's too. I mean, that Thanksgiving poem. I mean, that's just
A shedded
ruthless.
skin, a shedded
It's
skin left behind.
ruthless.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
ruthless. So I think I've got mixed feelings. I've got mixed feelings, but I think I'm glad that I could interpret it in the way that I was able to. And if I hadn't been able to do that, I think I would feel it's just too sort of off-putting.
Yeah.
But I think it has a much more sentimental claim on you, doesn't it?
I think so. I think for me, I would, yeah, my final thoughts, if I were to say the book, it's a decent first book. It's a exhilarating. The energy is more important for this book, I think, than a lot of the poems are, in terms of kind of like I wrote down in my things that I was really inspired to write after reading kind of each of the books. And we prepared to do 2 books for this, but we only got the one. But
Oh,
I
no.
was really inspired after each. I had to almost take a break after reading each one. And
Yeah.
this kind of, and I would say this book is not great. I wouldn't hold it up there with, say, The Wild Iris, her masterpieces and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's always so great to see this kind of first collection that has real gems, and I mean real gems in it, like real. You can see this kind of raw talent that is, I wouldn't even say it's searching, because there's a lot of times in those first books, like we said with Oppen, it's almost like a young writer searching for something. Not for Glück. Glück has found something, and maybe she's searching for the refinement that she became known for later in life. You can kind of get that sense, but it's just such a raw, exhilarating power that comes off the page when you're reading her stuff. It really is quite remarkable. And I'm glad that we decided to do this kind of deep dive and go book into it. Yeah. So this is just the first of many, listeners. Yeah. So Damon's going to be back here. We're going to try to get through this whole, but I think we can do it. I think we'll do it. As long
I don't know. I mean, right now I'm thinking maybe we should do it sequentially, because you're able to sort of put those markers down, which really kind of opened it out for me. And like the turn in the book, I hadn't seen that at all. So why confuse ourselves further? Maybe we should just try and get through as many as we can.
We'll feel it out. Yeah, we'll feel it out.
Yeah.
I think we can find
I mean,
how we're feeling. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the descending figure next, because the descending figure is the little soul.
Okay.
So I felt that where Firstborn ends with this little soul, it gets picked up in the descending figure rather than in the house on marshland. But we picked up some really interesting stuff, so I think maybe we should just go with the chronology and just point out when we get to it, if we get to it.
I have faith in us. I think we can do it. We've done it. We've done it before on the podcast. Yeah, so we'll do it here.
Okay. Well, you're the wise steward, so you can. It's your decision. Right. Okay, Andrew. So we'll wrap up there then. So that was great.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on too. When we do this, I feel like it's easier if we get into a rhythm. We do it like every couple weeks or something.
Yeah, sure.
Try to do this like 2 weeks from now, 2 or 3 weeks, if that's enough time. We'll feel it out. If stuff happens, life happens, we need to reschedule, whatever. That's we'll do that.
Yeah, sure.
I feel like if we stay on the train, it'll help us get through. So
okay.
I'll reach out to you here probably tomorrow or Monday, where I'll be like, all right, let's get this scheduled for 2 to 3 weeks from now, and we'll just keep rolling.
Okay, great.
Try to do the next 2 books, and we'll see where we go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's do House on the Marshland then, and let's give up on my cunning idea to sort of change the whole.
I think it may still work out that way. We'll see. But yeah, let's do the next 2. Yeah. So we'll do House on Marshland and Descending Figure, and then we can however we want to approach it, we can do Descending Figure first and then go back, or weave them around.
Yeah, we can do that. That's an idea.
Because now we have, again, that's what I like about this too, is now we have the first 2.5 hours of this that we can build off of, and build our own little
Sure. I mean, Cottonmouth Country does also fix it to House on Marshland, doesn't it?
True.
So I think I don't think I can get around that. So yeah, I think it'd be the House on Marshland next.
Yep. All right. Yeah, Damon. Okay. Thanks for taking the time. But
take care, Andrew.
Looking forward to the next one here. Yeah.
Bye.
Heavy.
Bored.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
You know, some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.